Well, thank you. Anything to do with your technical ability with speakers? I won't say a word. All right, we're gonna kick it off. Carolyn, if you can hear me, we're gonna kick it off.
I can hear you. Let's do it.
All right, so as you people online and all y'all know, Lisa is out today. She's somewhere having a girls get together, maybe in California. So hopefully she's not listening in. So I think you already seen the agenda. We're going to start off with Connor this morning. How many people know who Connor is? 2, 3. Obviously no. So you're gonna introduce yourself and give a good bio. But one thing you need to know is that Heartwood started here in the forest. Carolyn, what year did it start? Do you know?
I think it was 2000. Does that sound right?
Yeah, we're not 20 years old like San Antonio, but a long time ago when it started, this was where the chapter started. And so Jones Forest has always been a sponsor and a key advisor. And there was another forester here before Connor, who's now retired and moved to South Carolina, North Carolina. Well, it's one of the Carolinas. So Connor has taken his place. So you should consider him just like Texas Parks and Wildlife and AgriLife. It's one of our key chapter advisors. As a forester, he's going to teach you everything you want to know about the forest, but we're afraid to ask. With that, you can tell them your other background.
Okay.
And what you do here at the forest.
Sure. Thanks, Scott.
You know how to share this stuff.
Yes. Morning, everyone. My name is Connor Murnane. I'm the district forester with the Texas A&M Forest Service here at our Conroe district. Main job duties that we have here in the Conroe district is to assist private landowners with managing their property. So a lot of folks that own property in East Texas forested land, they can qualify for what's called a timber evaluation. If you're familiar with like ag evaluations or something like that, you know, you own a certain amount of acreage and you can get your property taxes greatly reduced or evaluated at a different scale. So folks that need timber evaluations for their property, that's like our bread and butter of what we do. We provide that service to them free of charge. We also provide guidance and assistance on what they need to do to properly manage their forests for the ultimate goal of, you know, timber harvesting, reforestation, and returning and redoing everything, right? Repeating the cycle. So let's see what else. I went to SFA, graduated from SFA in 2015 with a degree in forestry. I couldn't get a job with Texas Forest Service for the life of me, so I took the first job I could get up in Minnesota. I worked about 30 minutes from the Canadian border up in Minnesota, which is a super cool job, super fun. They give you a snowmobile in the winter and a 4-wheeler in summer. So it was definitely a good life experience, but the second winter hit in and I said, I can't do this anymore. So I found myself back here in Conroe, Texas, and now with these temperatures that we're seeing this past week, I somewhat regret that decision. So, but no, it's been good. I've been here for about 4 years now, so definitely enjoyed it. Quick icebreaker for everyone. Oh, I gotta make sure I'm sharing this. Quick icebreaker for everyone. Take a few minutes. When was the last time you planted a tree? Have you ever planted a tree? I guess it's a bigger thing. Mm-hmm. You've never planted a tree, maybe raise your hand. Okay, couple folks. That's okay. That's not an issue. I think as you spend more time with the master naturalist, you'll probably plant a tree at some point. It'll probably be here. So, for me, I think there's a red maple back here behind the office. I planted it last summer. But definitely just want to get a good icebreaker for y'all, talk about it. We'll go ahead and get started on forest ecology. Anybody know what forest ecology is? I want to take a crack or a guess at what forest ecology is. Yes, sir.
The general health and well-being of a forest's total ecosystem, so that includes soil, root structures,
Sure.
balance between prey and predator species, just the general health of forests.
Okay. Any other guesses or input on that? It was a great input on that.
You were sharing it, but they were saying that. So I think that fixed it. I'm gonna check.
Okay. We use Teams, so Zoom is very unfamiliar. Any other guesses on forest ecology? That was a great comment on it. Here's a definition. Forest ecology is a study of forests as a biological community with the interrelationships between the various trees and other organisms constituting the community and with interrelationships between these organisms and the physical environment in which they exist. Lots of big words there. It's a little early in the morning. Saying things like interrelationships. For me, when I read that, I think of how trees interact with their environment, how they interact with things in their environments, and then conversely, how those things interact with trees, right? So things like wildlife species, birds, deer, things like that, how they interact with the trees, birds and woodpeckers and cavity dwellers, they make nests and cavities and dead standing trees. Also, the red Cockaded woodpecker makes cavities and living pine. Organisms in the soil, how they interact with the root systems around trees, things like that. So overall, when we talk about forest ecology, we talk about how trees interact with their environment, and then thusly how those things within the environment interact with trees. There's a metal switch on that box. Okay. And just flip it one way or the other. Forestry, the concept of forestry has a different definition as defined by the Society of American Foresters, which is the science, art, and practice of creating, managing, using, and conserving forests in a sustainable manner to meet the desired goals, needs, and values. Desired goals, needs, and values are dependent on the landowner, right? For a landowner that wants to manage for recreational opportunities, they may not be interested in the timber. They may not be interested in producing an income on their property. And that's going to greatly affect what they're going to manage their forest for, how they're going to manage it, and everything like that. Because, with saying that, there can be things like, so managing your property for income, for maximizing income often works hand in hand with, say, wildlife management. So good timber management, things like prescribed burning, mulching the understory, getting rid of a lot of that brush, invasive species, things like that, that also benefits wildlife species as well. So we do talk about different goals and things, and while that's all well and good, most often than not, managing your goals also helps benefit another goal as well, because these things work hand in hand. And helps benefit everything. I gave a quick overview about what we do. Texas A&M Forest Service was founded in 1915 out of a need for a conservation plan for the state of Texas. So if we imagine East Texas in the late 1800s, early 1900s, can y'all take a guess or imagine what East Texas looked like back in those days?
Clear cut.
Clear cuts. Clear cuts across the landscape. We're moving west, right? We're establishing our homes. We're establishing our cities. Houston is being established. There's no plan for reforestation in East Texas. So things are getting clear cut across the landscape. Ranches are establishing their ranches. There's no trees being planted back in the ground. A couple of folks recognize this issue. Actually, the namesake of the forest, William Bidders Jones, considered the father of forestry of Texas, recognizes this issue. He does a lot of traveling in Europe. He goes out to Northeast United States, to the eastern half of the country, and sees what they're doing out there with forestry. And he brings some of those concepts back to Texas. And he is responsible for the creation of this agency, as well as the Texas Forestry Association, which kind of lobbies on behalf of landowners and the industry in Texas.
Essentially, to make sure that we didn't end up like Louisiana.
Yeah, essentially, to make sure that we had good, sound forest management practices in place, sustainable forestry, right? We need to be able to make sure that whatever we're taking from the forest, that we are replanting to meet that, or at least exceeding that, which is something that we definitely do. I mean, we grow more trees on fewer acres than we ever have before in the history of the state. And that's just research in genetics, different types of planting practices and management practices, things like that. But late 1800s, early 1900s, East Texas is getting clear cut across the landscape. So we need to have some sort of plan. So thusly, the Texas A&M Forest Service was born. We were born here in East Texas. We've expanded. You know, we have offices across the whole state. We are responsible for, you know, wildfire suppression across the state. If you hear about big wildfires in the state, we're typically involved as far as, you know, ordering helicopters to put those things out, everything like that. So quick overview of the forest in Texas. When we talk about forest in Texas, we most commonly think of the piney woods, as we rightly should, right? This is where we live, and this is what we should think of. But believe it or not, there are forests across the whole state. They don't always look as good, or they probably look a little bit different than what we're used to here in the piney woods. But across the entire state, there are 62 million acres of forests and woodlands, and that is the total size of Louisiana and Mississippi combined. So that's a pretty good chunk of land. That compromises forests and woodlands here in the state. Of that 62 million acres, 12 million acres of that is located here in East Texas. When we define East Texas, we think of the 43 counties in East Texas. So, you know, we're kind of here on the southwestern fringes of it. I would say Waller County, probably the eastern edge of Waller County. It's probably the end of the piney woods. But I mean, you know, we can drive 30 minutes west and we can be in Post Oak, Savannah, right? We have Forest College Station and Brazos Valley, things like that. But of course, East Texas stretches all the way up to, you know, the Red River and then out to Louisiana and Arkansas. Yes, sir.
So the 62 million acres, how much is, I'll say, forest cropland, and is any of it being left to develop what we'll call old growth forests?
Sure. I've actually got a slide coming up about who owns these forests in East Texas. But old growth forest in East Texas, I would say, does not exist. I would say that all the forests in Texas and East Texas have at least been harvested at least once in their lifetime.
Yeah, I understand that, but is any of it now being left and will not be cut?
Sure. Yeah. There's like wilderness areas in the state, like the Sam Houston National Forest has a designated wilderness area. So things like that wouldn't get cut. I would say most smaller landowners, don't have any intentions of cutting, although they have to make their timber valuation, but they never will, but things like that. So,
Okay.
that answers your question.
Yeah.
Is that timber evaluation?
Yes, ma'am. Timber valuation is like an agricultural evaluation you can do on your property to reduce your property taxes. But your intent has to be to harvest timber. Your intent is the key word.
Okay.
On paper, that's all I'm gonna say is intent.
When you say that, I mean, I'm assuming I've heard that in most cases there is a time frame which based on the growth of trees that you would have to harvest. I don't know if that's 20 years, 50 years.
Sure.
What is that?
Sure. So when we talk about pine trees specifically, you know, it's a whole different story when we're talking about hardwoods, oaks, pecans, things like that. Rotation cycles on oaks and hardwoods and things like that, we're talking about 100, 150, 200 years and upwards of that. Pine trees, if they're in a plantation, like this area right over here, sorry for y'all that are attending virtually. The plantation right here next to the office, it's 5 acres. You can see the trees are planted in nice neat rows. We go in there, we can clean those rows out. We can take out some of the deformed and poorly formed trees. In a situation like that, we could get a complete total harvest out of that at age 35, 36, when we can do a final harvest on that. Age 15 or 16, we can come in and do a first thinning. We can come in and take out one entire row, every fourth, every third, however we want to do it, and take out an entire row. That gives us a little bit of income halfway through the rotation cycle. Also reduces a competition amongst the trees, right? They're constantly competing for nutrients, sunlight. And I'll say that this stand right here, the plantation is well past due for a thinning. It was planted in 1986. It hasn't had a thinning since then. You start looking at the canopies, they start touching one another. That's a good indicator of a thinning that needs to happen.
So that eventually that will be cut.
Yes, it should be. Public opinion on that will probably determine otherwise for us, I would say. But yeah, overall goal of the forest is to manage for sustainable forestry, displaying to landowners what you can do on your property. And then, of course, you would come back in and replant.
Based on the red Cockaded Woodpecker,
Mm-hmm.
you would still want to do that? You still want to cut that?
So that area right there, the trees are a little bit too young for the RCW to move into, and it's not really their ideal. We talk basal areas and measure like density between trees. So it's expressed in like square feet per acre. But some of our best RCW stands, we talk like 50, 60 basal area. As this stand out here is probably somewhere of like 90, 100.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, real quick, so what you're describing with W.D. Jones is that this kind of serves as a demonstration forest for landowners?
Sure. Yeah. So there's 5 state forests in Texas, not to be confused with national forests in Texas or state parks. Big common misconception about this place is that it's a state park. It is not. It's not managed by Texas Parks and Wildlife. We're a completely separate agency from them. But the goal for all the state forests in Texas is to serve as a demonstration and research area for folks, for landowners, on what they can do on their property. You know, what does prescribed burning look like? What does chemical herbicide look like? What does mulching look like? Things like that they can be doing on their property. Yeah, that's kind of the overarching goal. This forest is particularly unique. There is no other state forest like it that is in such an urban setting, right? So while recreation is not the goal of any of our state forests, for this forest it almost has to be, right? There's too many people around. There's too many users. You know, there's the birding community, horseback riders, fishing, all things like that you have to meet their kind of wants and needs sometimes, right? And all play nice with one another. It's difficult. Right?
Including weddings.
And weddings at 7 a.m. That's right. Second largest in total forest land in the United States, only behind Alaska. Alaska is significantly outcompetes anybody else. And forests in Texas account for 23% of all woodlands in the southeastern United States. So from East Texas all the way up to the Carolinas and Virginia. Who owns these forests in East Texas? If it's not a surprise to you, it should be, because East Texas and Texas as a whole is very much privately owned. There's very little public land in the state of Texas. You're probably familiar with that. In East Texas in particular, only 8% of that land is public land. So that includes state parks, national forests, state forests, city parks, things like that. Only 8% of that is publicly owned. 69% of that is privately owned. We call these folks non-industrial private forest landowners, NIPF, non-industrial private forest landowners. This is mom, dad, grandpa, uncle, own some acreage in East Texas. They manage it however they see fit to meet their mandate. Industry and investment land, 23% of East Texas is held by industry and investment. These are things like timber investment organizations, TMOs, real estate investment trusts, REITs, things like this. They trade on the stock markets, right? Timber is an actual asset that you can see with your own hand. You could hold it in your hand if you wanted to. So these things like people's retirement funds are traded on this or invested in timber. All sorts of things are invested in this and managed. Yes, sir.
Where does like the Audubon Society that might own land fit in that pie?
The Audubon Society, I would probably put them somewhere in like a mix of public-private, maybe, depending on how they open up to, like Cook's Branch Conservancy out in the Montgomery area. While I would think they might be public, they're not really open. They don't really open up to the public, right? So they might be a little bit more like private, nonprofit organization. How have these forests changed in East Texas? Since 1935, East Texas has gained almost 2 million acres of forests. This is mainly due to Northeast Texas with a lot of their conversion from pasture to timberland. So as folks give up on pasture, they can convert their properties over to timberland, which is a significant undertaking. You can imagine what decades and decades of pasture land does to your soil structure. You create a significant hard pan almost like 3 feet below the ground. And for a taproot of a pine tree to get through that is very difficult. So you had to do things like shanking or ripping the bed, which is like a 5-foot steel shank. You sink it in the ground and you pull with a tracker and you start ripping up that soil pan, that hard pan. I think we're all witness to this phenomenon, but Southeast Texas has lost 159,000 acres of forest due to urban development. Particularly in this area, Montgomery County has definitely seen it the most. Houston has ever expanded, ever growing, right? There's also areas like Beaumont, things like that are ever expanding and growing. More concrete. The 2021 economic impact in Montgomery County. So this is talking about the forest sector and its input and its value here in Montgomery County. Believe it or not, Montgomery County was the top wood producing county in all of East Texas back in the day. That is very much not the case anymore. But back in the day, that was our claim to fame. In 2021, the forest sector directly contributed $63.5 million in industry output and employed approximately 400 people in the county. With a payroll of around $12.5 million, and you can see kind of the value of that there. Every dollar generated in the sector contributed an additional 40 cents to the rest of the county economy. How this ranks across East Texas, Montgomery County ranked 14th among all East Texas counties in terms of output value. Keep in mind, there's 40. We classify East Texas as 43 counties, so 14th, I'll take it, right? Not too bad. And the wood-based sector ranked 11th among manufacturing sector employers in the county in 2020. Yes, sir.
Just to reiterate for the group, Hartwood covers Montgomery and Walker County. And obviously Walker County has a lot of San Houston National Forest.
Mm-hmm.
What is your relationship with Texas Forest Service? What people do you have any collaboration interaction?
Sure, yeah, so we typically don't have much interaction with the United States Forest Service, right? So people like, I'm a state forestry agency, they're the federal forestry agency. So they manage the San Houston National Forest, which is several 100,000 acres. We typically don't interact with them. We do interact with them on prescribed burning. So if they have a big burn, I mean, you guys know that. I think we all know that when we see the column of smoke coming up from that direction. We do help them out with that. We've got all, you can see all these bulldozers parked around here. We typically send one of those up there. I will say that I am working on a timber sale with them. Recently, the United States Forest Service has the ability to contract out their timber sales to the state agencies. It's called the Good Neighbor Authority. It's a fairly new concept across the nation, but almost brand new in Texas. We as an agency have only done one sale before up in the Sabine National Forest, but I'm working on a 400-acre timber sale up in the San Houston, and it's kind of just been contracted over to us to handle it. So while we recoup all of our costs, all of our time and equipment costs from it, the rest of it goes back to the counties for their road maintenance costs. That goes back to Montgomery, Walker, and San Jacinto counties. So they help maintain those roads that are within the forest system or surrounding the forest system. Any revenue generated from that after our costs is where that money goes. As is the case for most national forest harvests, it goes back to the road system. Forests in Texas. So here are the major forest regions of Texas. Like I said, we're all well familiar with the piney woods of East Texas. You can see Montgomery County down there, just bordering up next to the Post Oak Savannah area, and the Blackland Prairies. Then we have Post Oak Savannah to our west, Live Oak Juniper regions further west, the Cross Timbers, and my particularly favorite forest ecoregion in the state is the mountain forest. Has anybody ever been up to Fort Davis, Guadalupe Mountains National Park, things like that? If you haven't been out there, I highly suggest it. If you're not aware, Texas does have a population of ponderosa pine trees in the state. 2 populations of it occurs in the Fort Davis mountain regions and the Guadalupe mountain regions. Ponderosa pine is a species that's most often associated with the Rocky Mountains. You see it all over Colorado, you see it in places like Montana, Wyoming, but we do have a very small population of it here in the state of Texas. So it's pretty cool. They smell, you can definitely smell a ponderosa. I mean, just if you've ever been up to Colorado, the mountains, I mean, it's what it smells like. Probably my favorite place, my favorite forest ecoregion of the state. Definitely really cool. If you haven't been out there, definitely highly recommend it. If you go to Fort Davis, just past the observatory, the Nature Conservancy has a big preserve out there. We've been doing a lot of work out there. I've got a video on that here upcoming, so I'll show you all that. But we're here in East Texas, so I want to talk about the East Texas upland species. Most commonly associated species with the East Texas upland forest sites are going to be your pine trees, of course. And when we talk about pine trees in East Texas, we talk about the southern yellow pines. So the southern yellow pines are going to be your longleaf, shortleaf, loblolly, and slash pines. Of all those 4, the king of commercially speaking, the king of pine trees in the south is loblolly pine. Grows faster, grows straighter, puts on less branches, right? When we talk about branching, things like knots in our wood, you can see that when you buy 2x4s or things like that, that significantly degrades the value of the wood depending on the number of knots that are present in it. So we want things that don't put out too many branches. Oak trees located in these East Texas upland sites are going to be post oaks, blackjack, southern red, and water oaks. And you also have some sweet gums, of course, are everywhere. Weed tree of the forest. Sassafras, black hickory, and elm trees. Shrub species are going to be your yopon, of course, wax myrtle. And you've also got your vines, so greenbriers, muscadines, Virginia, and crossvines. This is kind of what an ideal, this picture right here is kind of like an ideal East Texas forest to me, right? We want minimal shrub component, very minimal hardwood component in there. It's aesthetically pleasing to me. I like seeing that. It looks nice when I can see through the forest, right? It's not a wall of shrub like you see across the street. But this also helps promote natural regeneration, right? Pine seedlings, when they drop on the ground, they have to have sunlight. They are shade intolerant species. They will not tolerate shade. So if there's brush or hardwood overcroaching that within some sort of in the understory or mid-story of the forest, then they're not going to perform well. They're not going to live. They're probably going to get outcompeted by those species. East Texas bottomland forest. If you've ever been out to Caddo Lake, the only natural lake in the state of Texas, this is what your East Texas bottomland sites look like. You have things like white oak, swamp chestnut oak, cherry bark, overcup oaks, red maple, black gums, and then what these bottomland sites are most commonly known for is going to be your bald cypress and water tupelo species. Yes, sir.
So the last picture you had up there where you said it's aesthetically pleasing and what a forest would look like, is the only reason that it doesn't look like that around here is because of fire?
Yes, sir. Fire suppression.
Okay. Thank you.
Traditionally, historically, that's what East Texas looked like, naturally, without man doing anything. And lightning would strike, fires would start, however they started, sweep across the landscape and not get managed at all. Of course, as humans, develop things and move into places and the fire suppression, it's put out the fire, right? We don't want the fire, but it's a natural part of East Texas. East Texas is a fire-dependent ecosystem. It thrives on fire. It needs it. The pine trees are well adapted to that. Their bark, right, insulates them, shields them from that heat. As long as it's not too severe, right? The key with the prescribed burning is that it's low intensity heat, and we're not burning the canopy of the tree, right?
To maintain the burn cycle.
Yeah, to maintain the burn cycle. But I mean, we're talking every 5 to 7 years, wildfires would rip across the state and kind of keep the yopon and hardwoods in check. And it wasn't such a big deal. And for all the good that Smokey Bear has done, the most successful public ad campaign in the history of the nation, he's kind of shot us in the foot, right? Because people are very deathly afraid of fire. So you have to we're at the point now where we've done so good with them, we have to change the mindset that, hey, fire is okay sometimes, right? Yes, sir.
So the difference between what I see on the north side and the south side of Jones Park, why don't you work on that side?
Right? Why don't I just burn everything? I would love to, right? No, some of these sites, they're too thick. I can't. If I were to try to start a fire in that, it's too thick. The fire won't carry. There's not enough fuel source there, right? It's going to have enough fuel source to carry the fire. Or if there is enough, if it were to catch, it could cause, we have ladder fuels. Ladder fuels connect the bottom of the forest floor to the canopy, right? So vines, mid-story, hardwood trees, yopon, things like that. Fire can climb those ladder fuels and then reach up in the canopy. Once you have a canopy fire, it's devastating. We don't want that to start burning. But I have to be able to get it to a state where I can burn it. So I need some sort of grasses, some blue stems and things in the forest floor that can burn well. Lots of pine litter on the forest floor. I can't have a really thick brush component. And there's also other restrictions associated with prescribed burning outside of that, outside of the fuels, right? It's very weather dependent. I had to have a certain wind direction to burn. If I'm on the north side of the forest, I have to have a south wind. So I don't have a wind coming from the south. So I'm not dumping smoke on 1488. If I'm going to burn on the south side, I have to have winds from the north so that I'm not dumping smoke onto 1488. And I also have to keep in mind the giant Interstate 45, which is only a mile away from me. So a lot of the issues with prescribed burning, a lot of the complexity surrounding it is associated with smoke management. Not so much the fire with it. The smoke part is a part of it that people don't really think of. And we see all the time with the same Houston, right? You may wake up one morning and there may be some smoke. If you recall, most recently, like 2-3 months ago, there was a big wildfire outside of Bastrop, prescribed burning there on the state park that escaped. If you recall, maybe one of those mornings you woke up and like all of Houston was covered in smoke. This is from those fires out in Bastrop area. So, yes, ma'am.
So what do you do with the parts of the forest that have become so overgrown, it's dangerous to start a prescribed burn?
And I wanted to mention another thing about prescribed burning. There's homes surrounding every border of this forest, right? And I can't burn within a certain distance of those homes or I get in trouble. Texas Commission on Environmental Quality will come in and write several fines and do lots of things to this. But when I can't burn, I do things like mulching. If forestry mulching, I'm going to go over some forestry practices later in the presentation. A mulcher is essentially a skid steer. It's got a giant drum on it. It spins at a high rate of speed and it just chops up everything in front of it. What it does is it returns all of that material back to the forest floor, and that stuff can decompose at a much quicker rate than it would naturally. So it returns nutrients to the ground, kind of mimics that. The downside of that is very expensive. For every hour I use a mulcher, I've probably got 2 or 3 hours of downtime just maintaining it. Right now, it's not here because it's broken. It's at the dealer getting fixed. So there's just a lot of challenges associated with that. And any other forest management practice I recommend, prescribed burning is the cheapest, believe it or not. I mean, really, all I had to have is a couple of gallons of diesel and gasoline mixed up, and then some firefighters out here and a bulldozer, right? To maintain it. So, yes, ma'am.
So to see if I'm understanding correctly and judging from this picture, we always want to have like that space in between the canopies so that sunlight can come through.
Right.
And from what I'm understanding, the fire will pretty much manage like the lower side on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when these canopies get too big? How do we manage that?
Once they start competing with one another, you're probably looking at the climax end of that pine tree. Once it reaches a size like that, you're probably looking at it may start dying soon, right? I mean, trees always have a lifespan, right? But they're not. The trees do die naturally. So you're probably looking at that. From a forest management standpoint, while we want our trees to be a certain size diameter-wise to be able to make it to the mill, they can sometimes, believe it or not, be too big for the mill. So, if the diameter upwards of like 24 inches, that's probably our max. If we go above 24 inches, there's not a mill in East Texas that can harvest that or process that tree.
And like in the times when we weren't managing this forest, how the ecosystem managed that on its own? Like, what's the?
So as it progressed, things like pine forest would often convert over. As the pine trees started dying out, the climax species would be introduced, like the hardwood trees would start coming in. And then from there, you get like a self-sustaining forest once you reach that point of the forest cycle. But with the East Texas forest management, we try to keep it in this like pine tree phase, right, of the shade intolerant phase. You can also, from forest management standpoint, you can also go in and start removing trees selectively. Like out here, the red-cockaded woodpecker does not like hardwood trees in its forest because rat snakes can climb up those trees and they can climb onto pine trees and get into their cavities and eat their babies. And they also like a nice wide open area that they can fly in. So if I need to come in and remove some hardwood trees here and there, I might have to do it sometimes to create a better habitat for our civilians.
Thank you.
East Texas bottomland sites, most often associated, bald cypress, water tupelo species, you think of those. These are trees and species that love to have their feet wet. They love standing in water. They'll stand there for their entire life, drenched in water. Bald cypress is an interesting species in Texas. One of the few deciduous conifers, right? So it's a conifer that sheds its needles every fall. And typically when that time comes, when its needles start turning red, I get a lot of phone calls from people. My cedar tree's dying. What's happening to it? I say, are there root systems coming out of the ground around it? So yeah. So, this is bald cypress. It does it every year. You'll be fine, I promise. And sure enough, it comes back and puts on it. But bald cypress is a very unique species. There's only a handful of those that do that in the world. So bald cypress is one of those unique species. It's called a deciduous conifer. Quick video. This is the project I was talking about on the TNC land outside of Fort Davis. kind of what we've been doing out there to help save those mountain forests.
When you walk into a ponderosa pine forest in the Davis Mountains, it has a different feeling from everything else around it. Just feel that the place you're in is special, and we want to make sure that future generations have a chance to experience that same feeling and see that special part of the Davis Mountains. The ponderosa pines have really suffered from the recent droughts, and we've been losing a lot of the trees out there, and that's where working with the Texas Forest Service has been really helpful in helping us understand and manage the ponderosa pine ecosystem.
Frankly, it broke my heart to see what was going on out there. It was just hundreds, if not thousands of acres of dead ponderosa pine. So I knew after that first visit, we had to do something. Texas is found in two very small populations. One is in the higher elevations of the Caddo Lake National Park, which is here in the Davis Mountains, the island in the sky. It's under siege. It's being threatened. It's weather changes in the weather patterns that we've seen over the last 20 or so years, coupled with wildfires and bark beetle attacks, that really place the species of Texas in peril.
Well, what we're doing to try to counteract the effects of fire bleeds over into several different other problems that we're treating at the same time that we're trying to get a handle on. And the main thing is to reduce down the density of the forest that is competing with the ponderosa pine.
Well, I think a big role of our agency is providing technical assistance, being able to do the right thing at the right time in the right way. And this was not any different. We were thrilled when the Conservancy came to us and said, will you help us with this project?
Texas Forest Service has been a really great organization to work with because we share a lot of the same goals. The Nature Conservancy wants to protect the entire ecosystem out of the Davis Mountains, and the Texas Forest Service has really been helping us focus on the ponderosa pine woodlands.
We couldn't have done this without each other. Texas is big, and this project was not an exception. People with common objectives can come together in a collaborative way to make sure things get done where they need to get done.
This is something that we can all work toward and develop a better way of managing these things in the future.
It's important, really, because it's part of our heritage as Texans.
If we lose the ponderosa pines out of the Davis Mountains, the place will be different. It won't be the Davis Mountains that we know and love right now.
It's taken a very bad situation and finding the tools what we need to make sure that this stand of very important pine trees is extended into the future.
This is sort of the last stand. We got to try to do some things to protect and conserve the species for the future. It's literally going to go away. It's going away before our eyes.
I had the opportunity to go out to the preserve in about 2018 or so, and we planted a couple hundred ponderosa pines. So the way we do it, the ponderosa pines that are out there already, we harvest some of those cones and we take some of those seeds and then we grow those out in our nursery. So we grow those seedlings out, thousands at a time, right? And we'll come back in with the same genetics that we took from that place and replant those seedlings in the ground. I had the opportunity to go out there and plant a couple hundred of them a couple years ago. And then I think the next year wildfire came through and just burned everything.
Oh,
So that was pretty heartbreaking. But it's an ongoing project, right? A big problem out there is gophers, believe it or not. It's so rocky out there. You'd be surprised that gophers are some of the biggest predators of those pine trees. But we were doing things like putting metal cages in the ground around the root systems. We were putting like rat bait, like rat poison in the with it, things like that. But yeah, the gopher problem is huge. And then the deer, of course, like anywhere, we were putting like traffic cones around the little soccer cones around the seedlings so they have a chance to survive. It's definitely it's a pretty cool project, but it's heartbreaking to spend all that time.
Connor, what's the biggest challenge with the ponderosa pine out there? Fire, is it lack of water, is it gophers, deer, what is?
Fire and, whatever your thoughts are on climate change. I would contribute to that. Hotter, drier, longer summers.
Yeah. Okay.
Competition of, juniper comes in and starts taking over we saw a mulcher there. There was a large scale mulcher in that video, chopping up some of the underbreed, but just like we do out here in East Texas, right? Same kind of things happening out there. But trying to preserve a natural landscape.
Is there an effort to replant now?
Yeah, ongoing, annually we're out there planting. I always try to get out there myself. It's a pretty fun thing. I'm doing the same thing actually.
In what season of the year do you plant?
Sorry.
In what season of the year do you plant?
Fall, winter. Okay, succession, disturbances, and recovery. Succession is a replacement of one plant community in an area with another of different plant composition over time. And we can divide succession into two different categories. We can define it as primary succession, plant communities that establish where there have never been plant communities before. This is thousands of years that this process takes place, right? Glacial movements, volcanic islands, sandbars, things that we'll never see in our lifetime, right? That develop over time. Where plant communities have never been before and that they are established there at this new place is primary succession. Secondary succession are where plant communities that establish following the disturbance of some existing community. Could be a multitude of different disturbances. You and I cause disturbances to the ecosystem every day. Just walking out there, right? Just stepping on grass would cause disturbances. Building our homes. Fires cause disturbances. Hurricanes cause disturbances. We encounter the secondary succession every single day in our daily lives, some way or another. We see it. So primary succession, we start where there has never been a plant community before, starting bare rock. Pioneer species start moving in over hundreds of years, thousands of years. Establish our annual plants or our lichens, followed by our perennials, and then we start getting into some of those shade intolerant trees, pines, conifers mainly, and then we reach the shade tolerant cycle. Secondary succession, there's already been a plant community established, right? We were already there. We already had something growing there. Some disturbance came in, a wildfire looks like. From there, we have to restart the cycle over. You'll see it when we do prescribed burning out here, when we burn the forest floor, come back 2 weeks later and you'll start seeing little grass seedlings coming out of the ground. Secondary succession, right? Grasses and perennials, and see this takes much less longer than it does for primary succession, right? We're only looking at 150 plus years. But within 1 to 2, 3 to 4 years, we're looking at grasses and perennials. 5 to 150 years, we're looking at those shade intolerant trees, the species. So stage one of this is obviously some sort of disturbance, followed by the pioneer stage. And this is the development of those pioneer species, those shade intolerant grasses, shrubs, and weeds. They're very poor competitors and require full sunlight to thrive. This creates habitat for your smaller rodents, birds, reptiles, amphibians. Stage 3, we start seeing some trees, the shade intolerant trees mainly. pine, cedars, hackberries, sugarberries. She call them sugarberries. These species are very fast growing and short lived. These trees will eventually shade out the pioneer class of species, but they do provide foraging habitat for a little bit larger wildlife species or larger insect mammals. And then we get to the climax stage, right? So the climax stage is where those shade tolerant oaks, hickories, pecans, those shade tolerant tree species come in and they start creating the climax stage. Once we reach that stage, we're just self-maintaining forest until the next disturbance comes. So as trees die, openings in the forest canopy allow for gap succession. So smaller gaps within the forest start their own succession cycles. Succession is driven by the maturation of plant communities, and disturbances caused by external factors can alter this process greatly. And these disturbances can either move the community to a later stage or bring it back to an earlier stage in succession. And some of those disturbances, here's a list of them: tornadoes, hurricanes, forest management things like removing trees, ice storms. Goodness gracious, ice storms. We want to talk about that. Yes, sir.
So the Davis Mountains, the ponderosa pines, and everything I keep hearing is that we try to keep things the same way they were. There's obviously a change for whatever reason, climate works drier and hotter and all that. What would the Davis Mountains look like if we did not interfere? Would it go back to, would it move to a more desert, the cactus coming in?
I'd probably say so, yeah.
Isn't that, so is that not the normal process and should we really be fighting it?
I think the native species, we have a burden on ourselves to help save those species if we see them declining, if we see some sort of endangerment to that population of that native species that has always been there. We have some sort of duty or responsibility to help maintain that. Yes, we understand that the phases of succession, but if there's dramatic effects on the current stage that we're already in, that's having devastating effects on those plant communities that are there, then we should be able to do something about that, right?
But if again, if the trend continues, drier, hotter, it's going to move to some other environment.
Sure, and it's not just the Davis Mountains, right?
Oh, I know, I understand that.
Yeah, and then, maybe if our efforts fail, it will be. It will go into some different stage or more of a desert climate. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a point at which you're like, yeah, we can't do anything else? I mean, like even here, maybe, or anywhere. Like, eventually, like, can it get to a point? Because you don't want to just like say, no, we're just going to clear cut everything and start over. Or would you?
You could definitely get in that point.
Okay.
You could definitely get in that point. We've had that process. A hurricane comes in and we salvage as much as we can, but it's started to crack or bend some trees, and now they just look like junk. All right, let's just pick up. We'll start over.
Okay.
Sometimes, I mean, it happens in industry land all the time, right? A wildfire comes in, they try to salvage as much as they can, but the dead standing timber, it poses a risk like bark beetle damage. So dead standing timber can pose a risk or attract those bark beetles. And if you have some, and you definitely don't want those around your investment land, right? This is folks' livelihood that we're investing with here. So sometimes, yeah, it's best to just come in and restart. Or you try something, right? And it may take a decade or two. Like if I, try to plant another plantation out here and it doesn't take too well. All right, let's look up. We'll start over. So I want to ask you all, maybe give a little quiz. Wildfire prescribed burning. What effects will this disturbance have on succession? And will it move it to an earlier or later stage?
Earlier stage.
Earlier stage, right? As we burn up some of those understory species, we're trying to bring the understory mainly back to that pioneer stage, right? We want to keep our annual, our perennial grasses coming in. Probably more prescribed burning. People think of wildfire and like burning the canopies of trees. We don't want that. So a ground fire, right? Insect outbreak. This is a very iconic image of southern pine beetle damage. The bark beetle damage I was just talking about. This is from an infestation in the mid-90s. We haven't had an infestation like this since then. This is something that we monitor for. We have traps deployed all across East Texas to monitor and detect this species.
Where was that taken?
This is somewhere deep East Texas. I want to say like San Augustine County, Nacogdoches, Lufkin area, somewhere around there. But this is several hundred acres of forested land in East Texas that's completely devastated.
So that's where you just say, no, just start over?
Right. Well, we can harvest some of that timber. Some of that is salvageable. But the important part here is to get in front of that spread, right? So we have to, 10, 30 acres in front of that and put a ring around this outbreak, right? Start harvesting the trees around it.
Was this an invasive beetle or is it a native?
Southern pine beetle is a native.
It's native?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, native beetle.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Would you do an instance where there's, let's say severe flooding or something like Harvey, and so a lot of that bed sand gets pushed up onto the banks and basically like suffocates the soil, and so you just have acres and acres of pine tree that die? What would you do in that case? Is there any way you could basically clear cut and have to reestablish that soil, or?
Some of those areas, Hurricane Harvey, right, is like an extreme example of that, right? I mean, historic flooding, right? And traditionally, we're not going to find too many pine trees along those SMZ areas, the streamside areas, right? They don't particularly like their feet wet, things like that. But if that were to happen, we would probably see long-standing effects of that. I see it out here. If you guys have ever been out to our Sweet Leaf Nature Trail system out here along the banks, we're talking damage from Hurricane Ike, Hurricane Harvey, Katrina, things like that, that have caused, mortality. I mean, even just bank stabilization, right? As it erodes away at the banks, trees fall over. I had one yesterday fall over across the street because the bank eroded away so much. But definitely in those types of situations, you could start looking at removing some trees out and maybe plant. This probably has some long-term, long-standing effects on that particular site. It might be time to look at planting some different species.
We've got that along the Spring Creek Greenway.
Yeah.
Where there's just acres of pine trees that were on raised ground before, and the water just got so high that it's
just brought up.
Yeah.
Did you see that at Jesse Jones Park?
It was just west of Jones, so behind the Cypress Creek Golf Course area.
Just east of Jones,
Yep.
the Wildlife Conservancy has a preserve, and the same thing has happened there on the Bender Preserve.
Okay.
Exact same thing. It's interesting now to see it all these years later. Succession is happening
Oh yeah.
on those sand dunes, and it's totally different than it was 3 years ago.
We were cutting down trees and just laying them down and trying to establish soil on top of the deadfall.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, we'll make it compost.
There's a lot of deadfall.
Yeah.
So southern pine beetle damage like this, insect outbreaks, what effect is this going to have on succession? Will it move it to an earlier or later stage?
It'll move it to a later stage.
Later stage, right?
Because the insides of the trees are being eroded and not eroded, but they're being brought up from the inside because the beetles are sucking out all the moisture. So a lot of the more established trees there are going to collapse earlier than expected.
The southern pine beetle, right, targets our pine trees, our shade intolerant stage of succession, right? It's not going to target our hardwood trees, so they're going to have that much more opportunity. Once all these things are dead, they're not competing with the hardwood trees anymore. Hardwood trees have now all this opportunity and available room and sunlight and be able to grow and then move us to a later state of our succession. Yes, sir.
So is that what you see in that area?
Yes. But you can come back in and artificially replant pine trees and to try to encourage those to come back in.
So in a natural environment, this happens, you get this to happen, the arbors start to go, fire comes in, burns everything. Pines come back in then?
Mhm. Colorado, mountain pine beetle. So if you've been up to Colorado or like noticed their wildfires lately, it's all dead standing timber on the mountainside, right? That's why it's so devastating, because the mountain pine beetle has come across all the mountain ranges out there. The fire starts, it's dead, dry timber that's ready to burn.
So will pines come back in after that burn, even with the beetle around, or does it? What is
So
it?
hopefully the beetle like sweeps across, right? And as it sweeps across, you can start seeing that. And there are efforts to help replant trees in those areas. Some trees that maybe didn't die off, they can start seeding in naturally. But hopefully, you hope that the pine beetle will just move on. But management like that, putting a ring around this outbreak, harvesting a ring around it, you would hope that the beetles would just die off. They wouldn't have enough. But they can't fly forever, right? So if we could cut a big enough ring around it, they won't be able to fly forever.
The beetles need a certain maturity of tree before they can come in anyway, right?
That's right. They start releasing pheromones when they get there. Right? This happens with like Ips beetle. If you have a pine tree and you had like a bark beetle infestation on your pine tree, it was probably an Ips beetle or a black turpentine beetle. But they do something similar, but they don't cause widespread devastation or outbreaks like this. They're targeting individually stressed trees, and maybe 2 or 3 of them in a group, and that's it. Yes, ma'am.
What are the precursors to this happening?
Precursors to this, you start seeing like red needles in your pine. You're talking like
No, like
visible
what
sign?
conditions make it possible for there to be this severe?
Unmanaged forests. So not thinning your pine tree forests. Like I said, these spread these pheromones, right? So if there's not a lot of wind or like a lot of air movement within there, those pheromones just sit in the canopy, right? The canopy of those trees, and just serves as a big attractant. If you can come in and start removing some trees and allow some airflow in there, you start spreading that pheromone around. And also you start spreading out your trees more, right? So the beetle has to jump a little bit farther. But unmanaged forest, things that haven't been managed, that's going to definitely be one of your precursors to that. Lack of fire. Recovery. We've talked a little bit about this. No matter what the disturbance may be, there's always some sort of plant community that is available and ready to establish itself there once again, no matter the disturbance. And we're talking about secondary succession, right? Proper forest management can help speed up or enhance these efforts. And we talk about recovery and reforestation efforts. There's 2 different options we have. Natural regeneration, where we're relying on a seed tree harvest. So that picture on the right there, we see an example. The top image there is a mature stand of trees, pine trees, hardwood trees, whatever it may be. We go to a seed tree cut. Seed tree cut, we pick 4 to 10 of the best, biggest, tallest, straightest looking trees out there. 4 to 10 of those per acre. And those trees are going to serve as our parent trees, our mother and father trees. They're going to be responsible for seeding in the next cohort, the next generation of trees. Once that establishment has happened, we allow that to take place. We come back in, we remove the parent trees to reduce competition. And we tend to those trees, sometimes when you're relying on natural regeneration like that, you get areas of overstocking where there's too many seedlings. You get areas of understocking when there's not enough. So you have to come back in and start spacing the trees out, planting more in areas where they weren't enough. As opposed to artificial regeneration, there's nurseries across the Southeast, across the nation, across the world that grow pine trees out for commercial pine management, commercial forest management. They have different products, right? They'll sell you a bare root pine seedling. They'll sell you a containerized pine seedling, has a plug of soil around it. It's probably your better product to get. They'll also sell you things like progeny testing. They've tested this father tree for so long, they followed its lineage down to this way, and they know that that tree coming from that family line of genetics has a very straight trunk, has very minimal branching, and it's not susceptible to any sorts of insects. And they'll charge you for that.
So science actually says that forests do better when there is a great diversity of tree species present.
Sure.
So in this case, where we're managing forests for timber, we obviously want a lot of pine. How do y'all keep the health of the forest there that would be with the diversity, and you're mainly looking for pine trees?
Right. So depending on our goals, we can always have a hardwood component present within our pine forests. We also want to look at things like our stream site management zones. Stream site management zones are these buffer areas along creeks or streams, mainly comprised of hardwood species and this wide, diverse amount of species, but we don't do any harvesting in those areas. We can do very limited mechanical operations or things like that, but we want to protect those areas to serve as buffer zones to help prevent, pollution, sedimentation of streams or creeks when we're doing all this forestry stuff.
I was just curious because I know some species, I don't know about loblolly or shortleaf, but they can actually send out chemicals to prevent seedlings from sprouting next to them because they know that they're not going to propagate under their shade. So,
I think you see that with oak trees a lot. They put out some sort of chemicals, black walnut, things like that. They put out tannins, they put out chemicals that prevent things growing around them. Young pine tree seedlings, I see them in groups by the hundreds sometimes. They're just going around one another.
so that's not an issue with pine trees then.
Yeah, and I would say when establishing a pine plantation, right, at its very earliest, youngest stages, can be argued that it is a monoculture. And I can see the argument there. But what's really happening in the understory is a wide diverse amount of understory species, native grasses, wildflowers, things that are important to wildlife species. I mean, I can go out here and we can look and find 30 different species. But all that's in the overstory is, pines and hardwoods. I mean, there might be 4 or 5 different species in the overstory, but in the understory, that's where I'm finding like 20, 30 different types of species out there. But I can definitely see the argument that at its earliest stages of a pine plantation, managed pine like that, it could be seen as a monoculture. And you just have to allow it to get to that point where it can start producing. And management practices like prescribed burning help and encourage that native seed bank to start putting out some of those new grasses. Artificial regeneration, you buy your seedlings and then you gotta pay a planter to plant them in the ground for you. This is hand planting here. If you're not familiar with these folks, this is some of the hardest working folks you'll ever encounter in your life if you ever come across a tree planter. Typically they're from Central or South America, but they do hundreds of acres in a day and they get paid by the seedling. So they want to plant as many trees as they can, right? They get issued a certain amount of seedlings. You get 35 cents per seedling. So you have a big incentive to plant as many trees as they can.
I think Johnny Appleseed did it for free.
I think Johnny Appleseed did it for free too. You can also do machine planting. So that's a tractor or bulldozer, and there's an attachment on the back, and you drop your seedlings in the ground. I've been talking for a lot. I could use a break. I don't know about y'all, so I'm gonna take say like 9:20.
Hey, real quick, the restrooms are unlocked. You don't need to grab the key. And if y'all don't need all the bananas and oranges, that's gonna be fantastic. I appreciate that.
I like that. I liked it a lot.
Okay, so I'm gonna finish up, and then I called in like on your schedule today. Miss Donna Work is gonna come in, and she's gonna talk about red cockaded woodpecker with you, and then we'll do. I think she wants to go walk in the woods too. So we'll go do that. We're gonna get into the meat and bones of forest management. What we talk about with forest management here. So talking about that, I wanted to talk about the dichotomy of preservation versus conservation, and the concepts of those, and then some examples that you can kind of think of when you think about the differences between preservation and conservation. 2 very different words, right? Sometimes they get used interchangeably. 2 very, very different words. So preservation, when I think of preservation, I like to think of, to use as an example, I like to think of the National Park Service. The National Park Service likes to preserve things and what their natural state would be. Very minimal input from man, right? We want to preserve these iconic and important areas of the country for the betterment and enjoyment of all people, right? This concept, and I don't want to say it was developed solely by John Muir. I think we all know who John Muir is, right? But he kind of gets the credit for this kind of concept of preservation. And again, primary purpose is to remain in its natural state and to allow nature to take its course. Of course, the National Park Service does do management, right? They do timber harvest sometimes. They do other things like that. But if we think of overall goals of kind of what preservation means to us and kind of an agency that houses that or displays that would be like the National Park Service. As opposed to conservation. When I think of conservation, I think of the United States Forest Service, right? I think of their philosophy of multiple use, sustain, and yield. So they're managing their lands for multiple uses. They're managing for recreation. They're managing for rangeland, for grazing, for cattle and things like that. They're managing it for timber. They're managing it for watershed and wildlife species. There's all sorts of different things. So their philosophy is that just because it's one piece of property and we want to manage it some certain way, shouldn't limit us to being able to manage it for other people as well. Right? We want to manage that sustainably. When we're talking about timber, most importantly, we'll be able to make sure that whatever we take off the land that we are putting back into the land, or at least exceeding that point, right? People, a big misconception is that, National Park Service, national parks, national forests, the concept gets used interchangeably. Two very, very, very different things, right? And that's not to say that, both of these agencies maintain and administer designated wilderness areas, right, where nothing happens, right? A wildfire happens in a wilderness area, most often than not, the decision is to let it run its course. If it is threatening some community or if there is management that has to take place, no motorized equipment. That means I can't come in there with I have to get a permit approved by the Washington DC office. If there's a fire in the East Texas in the St. Houston wilderness, if I need to use a chainsaw, I have to get a permit from the Washington DC office to do that. I was out the Rocky Mountain National Park. There was a fire out there a few years ago. The East Troublesome fire. Yeah, I was out there with the bulldozer. Imagine the amount of backlash, the amount of rehabilitation that a national park has to do when a bulldozer comes in. Right? It was we were directed to do so, right? It was part of suppression efforts to put the fire out, but they're very big on the rehabilitation of that area and converting it back to a park. The United States Forest Service developed the philosophy of that again. I don't want to credit solely on him. But Gipper Pinchot considered the father of forestry in the United States. Which president interacted with both of you?
Theodore Roosevelt.
Forest management objectives and goals, things that you can do on your property. When I talk with landowners about kind of what some of their goals are for their property, things that they want to do, it could be a multitude of different things, right? And just because like I said earlier, just because we manage for timber production doesn't limit us from what we can do with our wildlife habitat, right? It works hand in hand. Prescribed burning for timber production results in better wildlife habitat, results in better browsing species, native browsing species for those wildlife species, right? Timber production and pine plantation setting, I talked about site preparation, planting, thinnings, chemical herbicides, prescribed burning, recreational opportunities. Mentioned out here, we see a lot of different users out here recreationally wise. Again, the misconception is that this is a state park, but the birding community, red-cockaded woodpecker is on every birder's bucket list, right? Birders, if you're an active birder, they have a bucket list, right? They have a species of birds that they want to see before they die. And RCW is always on that bucket list. Often, so much so that if somebody has a layover at George Bush, they will often rent a car, drive up here for their hour-long layover, just maybe to catch a glimpse of RCW. It's crazy. People from all over the world. And not to toot my own horn, but this place is probably a host of the most urban population of the species here, right? The same Houston National Forest has a population of it. I don't want to steal Donna's thunder. This place is such an oasis, it's so landlocked, right? Where else can the bird fly? There's so much concrete, there's so much development around it. So our species is often landlocked in here, right? You can imagine what that does to your gene pool. So what we have to do is called translocation. She'll talk about this, but we can trade birds with other populations. Particularly, we work with the Cockaded National Forest in Louisiana. Last year in October, we were able to pull 4 birds from their forest and bring them here onto this forest. It's a really cool project, really cool idea. It works the same way. I mean, we can trade our birds to other places, things, but you want to be able to make sure that your gene pool is doing okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Theoretical question. If yards looked like this, pine trees, native grasses, would red-cockaded woodpecker expand its range beyond this?
Right. As long as the habitat is there for them, right? It very much could so. Cook's Branch Conservancy has it, but I mean, they look like this. Some of the neighbors around the forest, those that actually have mature living pine trees on there, sure. I mean, RCW doesn't know boundary lines, right? But there is a program called the Safe Harbor Program. A landowner or a homeowner can apply for the Safe Harbor Program. And under that program, it works for any endangered species, right? There's usually a Safe Harbor Program for most endangered species. Particularly for landowners, you establish a baseline, right? So Donna would come out, or some sort of wildlife biologist would come out and establish your baseline. So you have 1 RCW on your property. That's your baseline. You have 0 RCW on your baseline. Once your baseline is established, if more of that species were to come in, if that population was to increase, you are now eligible to have those relocated off your property onto a place like this that will house them back to your baseline, whatever that baseline is.
Why would you do that?
Endangered species can severely limit what you're able to do on your property.
Again, I go back to the question, why? would
So RCW, if I wanted to conduct a timber harvest on this forest, I have to make sure that there is no RCW cluster or cavity within that area, because timber harvesting can greatly devastate or have detrimental effects on their population. And it works the same way on a landowner. You commit a federal crime if you destroy endangered species habitat.
I get it, but okay. We just talked about this is a little island that you keep bringing in.
But outside of this place is outside of this place. Your average East Texas landowner who owns 60 acres in deep East Texas wants to do a timber harvest. He has RCW on his property. He may have Louisiana pine stamp on his property. Things like that. The endangered species can severely limit what you're able to do. I mean, site preparation. I mean, rutting the soil. I don't think you like what I do.
So I'm getting that. You're my hero. I love what you do. I'm just trying to challenge where, again, you can't move everything from where it lives to someplace else. It's just, you can't do that. It's challenging.
That's challenging, right? Just not.
Quick question. What size properties are you working with? So when you talk about your working private landowners, how much acreage would
I was talking to somebody. I'll write you a management plan for your backyard. I'll write you a management plan for your front yard if you want to.
Oh, okay.
0.10 acres, right? But typically, to make that timber evaluation, meet the guidelines for that timber evaluation I talked about in Montgomery County, a minimum of 10 acres. If you live on the property, they'll take out 1 acre, they'll allow you to have the rest of 9. If you want wildlife evaluation, you have to have a minimum of 12 acres in Montgomery County. Some counties are different. Say Jacinto County, you have to have a minimum of 20 acres. But you'll see, when land goes for sale around the county, and then start dividing chunks of forested land, you'll often see them sell parcels of 11 acres. So you can build your home, and you can have 10 acres, apply for a timber evaluation, and you're paying, property tax wise, you pay, market value wise, you probably pay like $3,000 an acre, maybe something like that. For a timber evaluation, $30 an acre. I mean, that's how significantly reduced the property taxes are, because they're based off of productivity value of the trees, not market value of the land. Oh, and then we'll work upwards, hundreds of acres too, right?
So it's an ag exemption.
Exactly.
Like bees or.
Bees, ag, timber is its own exemption. I think the correct term is evaluation, but yes, exemption. Right, because it's a different evaluation as opposed to market value. Forest management activities that you can do on your property that tends to happen is timber harvesting, of course, natural regeneration or artificial regeneration, forest fertilization, pre-commercial thinning, best management practices, enhancing stand aesthetics for recreational opportunities, wildlife species. Site preparation, removing undesirable vegetation or preparing a seedbed. This is the most critical phase of forest management. And if you don't do proper site prep, you'll probably end up with a junky forest stand. You want to give your pine trees, whether they grow in naturally or artificially, you want to give them the best shot at survival. And to do that, you need to do things like, if you did a timber harvest before, you need to clear off some of that debris that was left there, right? You need to pile it up and burn it, or redistribute it lightly, so that the pine trees can be able to seed in and grow properly. If there's any weeds, you'll probably, once you do a timber harvest, or you have a clear off a piece of land in East Texas or in this area, you'll probably get a lot of sweet gum coming back up, and probably get a lot of yellow pine coming back up. You want to be able to control that stuff. You can control that through prescribed burning, chemical herbicides, mulching, a mixture of the two often helps. But this is the most critical phase, and most often overlooked phase of establishing good forest management practices. Yes, sir.
Fire, in a forest, if you had regular fires, that help eliminate invasive species.
Yes. Areas of the forest that I don't burn over here, you'll notice things like Chinese tallow, Japanese climbing fern.
So if you took let's say 100 acres, based on the natural fire cycle you said, which every 5 to 7 years, and you did that for, let's say, 20 years, you would eliminate, based on a fire coming through, you would eliminate most of the invasive species.
Significantly.
Okay.
You can see here, if I don't get an area burned 1 year, and you can see it, you can see the tallow coming out. You can see the yopon coming back up. You can see the sweet gum coming back. Yopon and sweet gum aren't invasive. But
They're prolific.
prolific. And outcompete what the trees that we want to do. I talked about this process, natural regeneration. Again, there's two different things you can do when regenerating your forest. Artificially purchasing seedlings and planting them. Naturally, of course, you're relying on Mother Nature. This is the cheapest method of doing it. But keep in mind, you probably have to do a little bit further management in the future because you need to look at density, right? You need to look at spacing. Are you overstocked? Are you understocked?
Sorry, Sean, I don't know if you mentioned it, just real quick. So whenever you have like a lot of the pines, or doing like the pine forest, right, do you have to mess with the soils to make sure that they're not like leaching out just for that specific plant? Do you have to do extra stuff?
Typically not. Before you do anything, you should definitely get a soil map and determine what kind of soils you have, because if you're planting pine trees in clay soils, good luck. You're not going to last too long.
That's why there aren't that many pine trees near Magnolia.
That and wildfire damage from previous history has definitely damaged Magnolia. But yeah, you definitely pine trees, the south pine trees, southern yellow pines, they love sandy, deep sandy soils, right? Pine trees often get that credit of having that giant taproot. While certainly there is some sort of taproot there, that's kind of what it needs. It needs to go through deep sandy soils. If it hits any sort of clay, hard pan, I talked about pasture land, things like that, it's not going to be able to live or survive or anything.
And when you cut down like a row here, or multiple rows, or you start over, do you have to do anything to the soil? Do you just plant again? You're good to
Not
go?
really, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And I don't have to do anything with the stumps either. I'll just jump the stumps and space them around the stumps.
Cool. All right.
Artificial regeneration, like I mentioned, you can allow, and this allows for a selection of specific traits to accomplish your objectives. You can find trees that have been treated with, chemicals or certain things to be able to resist root rot or spread of diseases or things like that. You're less dependent on seed fall, on natural regeneration. You determine the density, you determine the spacing, right? I want an 8 by 10 spacing in my pine trees. That gives me a certain amount of trees per acre, and I know that. If I'm establishing a stand, I want to plant around 600, 700 trees per acre. Obviously, I know there's going to be some mortality, right? I'm expecting mortality. If I come back in, 10 years later, I want there to be, 200 trees per acre, 250, 300 trees per acre. And some of that mortality may have been from me coming in and doing thinning, right? Removing some of those trees that need to be removed. Tree planting, this is artificial regeneration. This is converting a pasture land to timberland. If you can see, there's a guy sitting in the back of that implement, in the back of that tractor. He's got a box of seedlings there on his right, and he picks them up and he drops them at that spacing that's been determined. Chemical herbicide and weed control. Picture on the left is obviously not East Texas. This can be done by hand with a backpack sprayer. It can be done by, the image on the right there is a skidder with the spray tank on the back of it. Your goal here is to knock out some of those annual perennial weeds that can choke out or stunt the growth of your pine seedlings. All these weeds, we talked about tallow, yopon, sweet gum, very prolific, very fast growing. They will outcompete your pine seedlings if left unchecked. I talked about thinning and the importance of doing that. You're really mimicking what Mother Nature does naturally, right? These trees are always in competition with one another. There's a certain amount of available nutrients in the soil. There's a certain amount of available sunlight to them. So you're mimicking what Mother Nature does. In the long run, they're going to compete with one another and somebody's gonna win. So why not speed that process up and start, I'm gonna identify the winners and I'm gonna identify the losers. I'm gonna take this row and that row is gonna be the losers, right? You can often see, if you count the rings of a pine tree, you can often see where a thinning took place because as the rings compress, right, that's obviously putting on less growth. And around that age 15 to 16 mark, and I can spot it when I take a portion of the tree, and you can just see the rings just jump significantly. Timber stand improvement practices. This is the goofy one. This is one that's not commonly done. This image here is called the hack and squirt method. It's typically done on individual trees. I can't imagine doing this across dozen, even 5 acres. I couldn't imagine doing this. But you take a machete, you take an axe, a little hatchet or something like that. You chop in the cambium layer of the tree. Spray. This is a mixture of Roundup, I'm assuming. Spray it into the cambium layer of the tree. It'll kill off the tree, throw the tree. So you want to do these things on like invasive trees, Chinese tallows, or some of those trees that you don't want. Sweet gums are a big one that I would probably go after too.
You really don't like sweet gums?
I really hate sweet gums.
I also.
Why is that?
How compete? There's no commercial value for them. If you ever had to use a lawnmower over one, or shoot out those spiky balls at the side of the lawnmower.
You said that you wouldn't imagine doing this on more than 5 acres, so we have 22 acres that we're gonna try and do this on of tallow at a preserve that we own.
We've already done a bunch of it.
Yeah, is it just because it's so labor intensive?
Yes.
But if you had a bunch of fabulous volunteers that would do
I had a
it.
bunch of fabulous volunteers, and it was the middle of winter, and it was freezing outside, and yes.
You can't recognize the tallow in the winter all the time.
That's
Yeah.
true, right? So maybe in the summer I've got to, okay, I'll remember that one. I'm gonna flag this one, and I'm gonna come get it in the winter, right? Yes, sir.
Would you rather do that method or the cut and paint method?
I'd rather do cut and paint, probably.
We've only been burning on the big trees.
Yes, sir.
If you do the Roundup, this damage in the past, only.
As long as you're, spraying that where it needs to go, right?
Not when you do it that way.
The Roundup is not selective. We'll kill whatever type. Prescribed burning, I talked about the benefits of doing this, but this also reduces the risk of wildfire because there's less fuel available to burn, right? The fire needs that fuel to be able to burn. If there's lack of it, if there's no fuel for it to burn, it's not going to go anywhere. So another benefit of prescribed burning, stimulates that herbaceous layer, those native grasses, the blue stems particularly. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I have another question. For the prescribed burning, like, is there ever biologists that go out and be like, man, we killed 47 turtles?
Sometimes you could probably look at that.
Like, is that ever, is the animal impact ever considered when prescribed burning, or is it pretty much just focused on like the vegetation?
I think sometimes it is.
Depends on where you are.
There's certainly, and depending on the species, right? Most often than not, I would say it's an accepted risk.
Okay.
Accepted.
Well, think about it this way. In the aftermath of a prescribed burn, there will be a lot of dead trees that likely with all the water that's being used to put out the prescribed burn will naturally decompose what's left of it. Decomposers come. Other species that eat the decomposers will have a nice meal. So while it might be troublesome for one species, it could be beneficial to several others.
When burning here on this forest, I had to identify the red-cockaded woodpecker cavity trees. We typically identify those like a green band around them, painted around them. Sometimes we're not quick enough. We just have to remember which one has a cavity in it. But we'll see them today. If you haven't seen them before, these trees, they peck in the side of the tree, right? And they release those resin wells and sap starts flowing down the side. It looks like a candlestick sometimes. You can imagine how flammable that stuff is, right? So if I'm burning in the forest, I need to put a ring around this tree I need to rake away from it, get out there with a hand rake and start raking away some of the needles or things like that. If fire gets too close to this, it will light that sap and travel up that tree with a candlestick and torch that tree. The wildlife impacts of that, I need to be able to I need to make sure, and whoever's dragging the drip torch, whoever is dropping the flames, I need to make sure he knows that once he gets this ring, he needs to go around it. He doesn't need to get up next to it. That's kind of some of the wildlife mitigation. If anything that I mentioned today, prescribed burning is the cheapest, most cost effective. Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of an unrelated question, but when you mentioned about making these management plans, do you need to know like the history of a particular piece of land before you start doing that? Is that important?
It's great. It's awesome if somebody does. If somebody has an old management plan that I can look at. I can look at what a previous forester recommended. If they don't have that, I can make certain assumptions. I can see burn scars on the side of trees when prescribed burning. Okay, it's a good sign. I can see stumps, clean cut stumps. Those things will last if they're not, ground up. Those things will last 15, 20, 30 years. I can make an assumption that at some point there was some sort of timber harvest that occurred out there.
Is there any kind of record, like just across these Texas, or is that just something that independent owners keep track of?
Very site specific, yeah. I would say, obviously, my records here for this place, the records for national forests, reserves, or public lands like that would probably be a lot better than your average private land. That's just passed down word of mouth.
There's not just some registry out there for, okay.
Now, there's not just some widespread database out there.
Treeancestry.com.
But those visual indicators like that, mainly burn scars and clean cut stumps, are huge giveaways that some sort of management has occurred on this project. Okay, when people think of the big bad logger or forestry man or how awful forestry is, they probably think of this image right here. Oh, a clear cut, right? It can look devastating, right? I'm not going to deny that, right? It looks like a bomb went off. There's a lot of debris left over. It's not as clean as this. There's a lot of debris left over. There may be some like non-merchantable trees that were left there. But if I'm doing proper forest management, I've got a good reforestation plan in place, right? So I'm going to let this sit for a year. I'm going to allow the weeds and things to grow. I'm going to identify what those species are. Next year, I'm going to come back. I'm going to spray that site. I know what the weeds are. So I'm going to mix a chemical herbicide that can reduce those weeds and get rid of them. After that, maybe I want to do prescribed burning. And after that, I can come back in, I can plant seedlings. In a clear cut like this, I'm not relying on any parent trees, right? I'm not relying on that seed tree method that we talked about, right? I've got to, the trees on the edge are not going to be enough. They're not going to provide the amount of stocking that we need to have a well-stocked managed forest. They're not going to do it. Seedlings aren't going to travel that far. So I'm going to rely on artificial regeneration, purchasing the seedlings, planting them in the ground to be able to regenerate the next forest. Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible to do these kind of management organically without like chemical herbicides?
Yeah, I would say, whatever your thoughts or personal beliefs are on chemical herbicides, it's always an option, right? It's not. I will say that it does provide, it's really good at what it does. And it's really good at killing things that maybe you don't want to kill. So you need to make sure you know what the heck you're doing. I'm a licensed herbicide applicator with the state, so I have to go, continued education units. I have to do that annually, right? I get inspected by the Texas Department of Agriculture. When I see that truck pull up out front, I start pushing like, hide the Roundup, please. I mean, if you have a license, you have to document any sort of spray.
It's terrible.
That's awful.
It's so stressful.
It's very, very stressful.
But if the landowner is like, well, I want you to do a management plan, but it has to be organic, you're able to do that. Are you?
Sure. I mean, I can always recommend things. Let's put some goats out here and they'll start eating away at it, right? And some people do it. Some people have argued with me and say, listen, I'm not doing burning. They can't do burning. I agree with that. They're against the chemical herbicide. Okay, that's fine. They don't want any sort of machinery. They want to take a natural, more holistic approach, and goats can provide that.
Yeah, I'm kind of tying this to yours. class from, our last class, we talked a lot about
Okay.
organic,
Organic. Yeah.
fertilizers and herbicides. things like that.
Agricultural vinegar is sometimes used. That's a less.
Let's say that's why I use the vinegar, the Epsom salt and Dawn mixture for infusion.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you have some sort of surfactant. So Dawn dish soap works well. You want to break this with the water tension, the surface tension, right? Just like hand soap, how it breaks that surface tension. If you're going to use herbicides or any sort of, agricultural vinegar, Epsom salt like that, you need to add some sort of surfactant. Dawn dish soap works great. Penetrate that waxy layer, that leaf, and then it's soaking in the leaf. The agricultural vinegar is a less damaging or less chemical. It's about as natural as you can get.
Thank you.
That's fine too.
We talked about seed tree management, seed tree harvesting. Again, 4 to 10 of the biggest, straightest, best looking trees per acre on the property. These are going to serve as my mother and father trees. These are going to repopulate my forest for the next generation. But I have to keep in mind that with this, I'm relying on natural regeneration, so I'm not going to be able to determine the density or spacing that I want it to be. So some areas may be well overstocked than what I want. Some areas may be well understocked than what I want. I also need to make sure that I come back in and take out those parent trees sometime 5 to 7 years in the future. Because those parent trees will start shading out, start competing. They're much larger trees that require far more nutrients and water and sunlight, right? And they're probably going to take it over the younger seedlings too. Shelterwood, very similar concept, just more trees per acre, 21 to 60. It's probably a little bit more aesthetically pleasing than a clear cut would be. Best management practices, I talked about this. Usually each state has some sort of best management practices in place. In Texas, these are voluntary practices. I'll let you imagine what states they are not voluntary and you're required to follow them. But even though they are voluntary in this state, you do see a lot of compliance with it, voluntary compliance. Donna does a lot of these inspections on these logging jobs and things like that. But the reason why there is so much compliance is certification, wood certification things. Like you see things like Sustainable Forestry Initiative. You probably see it printed. There's probably something on a Starbucks cup that says about Sustainable Forestry Initiative or Forest Stewardship Council. The products that were used to make this, the timber, the wood products that were used to make whatever it is, were harvested sustainably from site to processing to your hand. There's chain of custody control right there, and best management practices is part of that. And that's why you see so much compliance. Because no mill, no processing, no sawmill, no paper plant, no paper mill is going to buy wood that they can't certify, that they can't get certified. Talk about streamside management zones. This is what that looks like from the air. This area was clear cut. You can see it was just recently planted as well. You can see all the little green specks there planted in the rows. But the streamside management zone wasn't touched. This is to reduce quantity of sediment and pollution that could potentially harm that water body. And so this 50 feet buffer zone starts at the edge of the bank. It's not the center of the stream. I would have a 50-foot SMZ on San Jacinto River. I wouldn't make it out of the river. So it starts at the edge of the bank. Depending on topography or slope around that water body, you may need to increase that, right? If I have a very steep hill next to that, then I need to increase that further, 100, 150, 200 feet. This doesn't limit what you can do in there. You can still harvest, but we want to maintain, I talked about basal area earlier. We want to be able to maintain at least like a 60 basal area square feet per acre in that area. Examples of BMPs, these are things called water bars. Water bars divert water off of the road back into the stand. So a water bar is a hump, it's a speed bump in a forest road, right? And when the water hits that, so with water and sedimentation and polluting into streams and creeks, things, you want to be able to reduce the quantity of the water that's reaching that site, and you want to reduce the velocity of it, right? So with water bars, if we put it at an angle in the road, and with that, the water hits that water bar and starts diverting off into the stand. You can see it gets diverted off into the stand.
Is that what those are in the national forest?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I always thought that was a spot for you to pull over and park. So it's really
sometimes like that, yeah, but sometimes they often serve another purpose like this. So a wing ditch.
Okay.
A wing ditch is used in conjunction with the water bar. Once that water hits the water bar, it goes into the wing ditch. The wing ditch does a J hook and goes and flows it back up into the stand, away from the creek or stream, right? I want that wing ditch, the J hook, and point away from the creek or stream. To reduce the velocity and amount of water that could follow, that could travel down the roads are the biggest source of pollution or sedimentation of streams and creeks. Your biggest contributor of it. Forest health issues in Texas. Oak wilt. We don't deal with oak wilt much in this part of the state. It's too humid. Doesn't do too well. If you're from Austin or Central Texas or West Texas, you're well familiar with oak wilt. Hypoxylon canker. Water oaks are highly susceptible to hypoxylon canker. Any oak tree. Pine bark beetles. Talk a little bit about those. Emerald ash borer. That's that pretty green bug there on the screen. We'll talk about them. Texas leaf cutting ant.
What do you do about the leaf cutting ant? If it's threatening your landscape?
There is an insecticide. Actually, there is one that you can buy at Lowe's.
Delta Guard?
Andro ant block.
I haven't had Emdro work.
Yeah. It's the only registered one designated to kill leaf cutting ant, is what I would say on that. Okay. No, it kills a multitude of other ones, but it is the only registered product that kills leaf cutting. But there's also that you can buy over the counter, right? And you don't have to have, but there is a chemical herbicide PTM. It gets injections into these Texas leaf cutting ant mounds. That's what really does the job. What does the trick. Again, you have to have I believe you have to have a license for that. Let's talk about these. Pine bark beetles are the biggest commercial threat to forests in Texas. The biggest threat. I would couple that also with urbanization and wildfire damage too, but this is your biggest threat to commercial forests in Texas. There's 3 different types of beetles. I talked about the southern pine beetle, and all these are natives. They're all native pine beetle. Southern pine beetle causes a widespread, large-scale outbreaks, devastating damage. The black turpentine and Ips beetle targets your weak, individually stressed trees, 2 to 3 at a time. Here's southern pine beetle. That's what he looks like there on the top. A hairy, nasty looking thing. Your big indicator of all the pine beetles, of all the bark beetles, your biggest indicator of an infestation is going to be red needles at the top of the tree. And once you start seeing these are called pitch tubes. This is the waste that the beetle ejects out his back end and goes out the side of the hole that he bored into. Called pitch tubes. In the summertime, if you have a bark beetle infestation in your pine tree, you can stand next to that tree and hear them chewing inside of the tree.
They're like little rockets.
Yeah, and you can peel, if you peel away the bark, you can see these S, on southern pine beetle, you can see these S-type galleries that they make, serpentine through. They don't eat the wood, they eat the phloem and the layers in between the bark and the wood, right? So they're eating the nutrient source, they're eating the blood, right? The nutrients that go up and down the tree, right? That's what they're going after. Yes, sir.
So these are native, and for pine woods are native here as well. What's the balance? How do you sense the balance?
Yeah, so
Check that.
proper forest management, things like that, being able to manage your property. Southern pine beetle in particular, you don't have dense, overgrown, thick forests lacking fire management or any sorts of things like that. That could dense and crowded forests just welcome any types of beetles, diseases, root rots, things like that. Yes, ma'am.
So you walk out on your property and you find a pine tree and it's got these things on it. So now you know, okay, my tree's got these beetles in it. Do you just say, okay, it's a goner, or do you?
If you're seeing pitch tubes and red needles, yes, it's a goner. If you're seeing that already. So what your best goal is there is to protect your other trees, right? Your other pine trees, you don't want to jump. So the best thing to do is cut down that tree, destroy it on site. The only real, and this is a fantasy dream, right? So the only way to be able to effectively treat a tree and protect it from some sort of infestation like that is applying permethrin the entire tree. Some people go, you know, as high as they can reach. I'm sorry, that's not gonna do it. I mean, go rent a cherry picker and start spraying the entire tree, right?
He's like one of those planes.
Yeah, that's really the only best goal for that. So again,
So cut it down, burn it, and hope that they didn't get on the other ones.
and hope that they don't jump to the other.
Yeah.
Emerald ash borer, if you're not familiar with this species, this invasive species from Eastern Asia, came to America on a load of furniture in a harbor, I believe on the East Coast, Georgia somewhere. Very, you should be familiar with this bug. Very, very destructive, targets all ash trees. There is no known treatment. There is no known way to prevent this. It is coming. It has been identified in several counties in Texas.
Bad time for us to go off.
Most recently identified in Parker County last week. It was identified in Parker County.
Emergency alerts.
Yeah. Most recently identified in Parker County last week. Also has been identified in Tarrant County. These, on the right image there, these are called emerald ash borer traps. These do not kill them. They help us detect the presence of emerald ash borer. They are spread across the state. I've got 8 here in Montgomery County that I maintain. I've got to rebate them next week, actually.
So what do you do if you find one?
I call my bug guy and say, hey, we've got emerald ash borer here. So, okay, put it on the map.
What do you bait it with?
There's certain pheromones. I keep them in a freezer. I couldn't tell you the exact mixture of what it is. I'm not. But this purple trap there, it's covered in glue, like on the outside of it. It's a nightmare to put up. I gotta hang this thing in a tree. So I can imagine, and it just gets everywhere and it destroys your clothes. The bed of your truck gets covered in sticky goo, and it just collects pine needles and pine cones. It's a nightmare. So definitely, but. So if we see anything that looks suspicious, I put it in a tube with alcohol and I ship it to my bug guy and he can confirm or deny that. Yes, sir.
Now, is the glue corrosive compound that only the beetle will be attracted to? That
No,
way-
I catch all sorts of different things.
Oh, okay, so there's no way of ensuring innocent other wildlife doesn't get caught in the trap.
I would say it's not strong enough to hold like a squirrel or something.
Okay, that's what I was worried about.
I've never caught a squirrel. Beetles, insects, and things like that. This is what that destruction of emerald ash borer does. This is a neighborhood street in Ohio, June 2006 compared to August 2009. All emerald ash borer infested.
And that's in the same month that they're.
Is there any way that a private citizen could volunteer and send those traps out for?
Yeah, if y'all are interested, yeah, I can do it. Yeah. There's some in Harris. There's a lot in Harris County.
Oh, okay.
There's 24, something like that.
Is there a map somewhere, or how do you know where there is one?
I have one and we have one, if you guys want to know.
No, I was just curious, like, you know, because sometimes you see like the mosquito traps and other things. I'm always like, what the hell is that?
Most often than not, people come down because they think they're trashing a tree. Like I got 2 in the woodlands that I hung up a month ago. I guarantee you they're gone. Somebody complained about this giant apple. I guarantee you.
Maybe you should put a sign.
I would love to, yeah, I should put a sign.
So
People see
they'll
that-
read the sign, but
Right.
they'll think that's also trash.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Did they go after prickly ash?
I believe any sort of,
Any
anything in the ash family. Here's a map. This one's out of date. Again, I just said Parker County got detected last week. But this is the presence of emerald ash borer. It is coming. It's moving from east to west.
Coming from a box right outside, it's a flow of something, and the red lights lit up.
Oh, septic.
Septic, yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah, don't go walk out in the grass. This is the map of emerald ash borer. How do you think? I mean, you would assume, right? If it got to Tarrant County from northeast Texas, how would it get there? You would assume that it touched every county in between. How do you think it got there?
truck.
Wood, wood that was
Good.
transported.
It is I-20.
Firewood.
Lumber transport.
Firewood, yeah.
Firewood.
So look at that I-20 corridor. You hear a lot, if you ever go to like a national forest, if you're ever traveling, go like out west or somewhere like that, you often hear like, don't bring in firewood from other places, harvest your firewood on site, burn on site. This is why. Bugs they infest these wood sources, and if you were to transport them, you're transporting invasive species.
So it's okay to burn these trees on your own property because if they flee the wood, they're already there? Is that the theory?
That's what I would recommend, that you're not transporting them to some other place.
But can they, like, they would just leave the wood before they like burned alive, I would assume.
You could burn them alive.
I don't know, I was just, I'm just curious, as like, what point, like, are you just spreading it then within your own property?
That'd be my goal, right? Burn them alive.
Yeah.
But-
Okay, cool.
Last section here, wildfires in Texas. Texas witnessed the most destructive wildfire season in the state during the 2011 fire season. If you were in Texas during this time, you're well familiar with what the state looked like then. This is Bastrop State Park there on the right. I believe during this fire, like 96% of the state parks are burned. Picture on the left, there's a very iconic image outside of Bastrop of what it looked like during that time. If you've lived around the area, 2013-ish, you're familiar with wildfires out in Magnolia. The largest wildfire in southeast Texas occurred out in Magnolia. If you drive north of Huntsville, you'll see there's like a drop off of pine trees around 45, right? You can still see dead standing timber in those areas, all from wildfire. Jumps, I-45.
Oh, wow.
You can see next time north of Huntsville, north of the rest station, the rest area. Over 3.5 million acres were burned in Texas during this time. 3,000 homes were destroyed, but we were able to save 35,000. That's an easy number to say, right? Okay, well, how many homes are destroyed? That's how many we saved. Let's skip this one. This is about restoring trees and replanting trees in Bastrop State Park. Challenges to our forests. These are some challenges that pose a risk to East Texas forests and Texas across the state, actually. Population growth and urbanization, big one, right? Biggest threat to forests here in this part of the state. Are communities prepared to deal with that effect the population will have on the forest resources? Whether it's complete destruction, whether it's harvesting for home building or things like that, are we prepared to meet that demand and sustain that demand? Central Texas woodlands, threatened by land fragmentation, wildfire, oak wilt, a multitude of different things. Austin area, people always want to be outside of the city. They want to move on what we call a wildland urban interface. It's not just unique to Texas, it happens across the world. They want to live out, they want to get out of the city, they want to come back to nature, they want to live in the woods. This creates unique management challenges, not for wildfire alone, but for forest management, right? People are spread across these woodlands that were once just bare woodlands. Now we have people, we have homes, we have investments, we have things, properties, resources, and structures and things that we need to protect. Sustainability of forest resources in East Texas. How will this urbanization affect the East Texas wood sector? Again, are we able to sustain that demand and meet that demand long term? The importance of watersheds and forests and the role that forest plays in protecting watersheds cannot be understated enough, right? If anything, if forests bring any value to the state of Texas, it's for their watershed protection qualities alone. And it's hard to put a financial amount on that, right? It's hard to define what that number, because I mean, that's how we talk, right? We talk money, right? We talk green. And it's hard to put, I mean, what is the commercial value of water filtration? What is the commercial value of bank stabilization around these areas, around water supplies that we use every day? Recreationally, drinking water, whatever it may be. Forests are responsible for filtrating that water and putting it back into our watershed. Wildfires are a growing statewide threat. It's a pretty active wildfire season we've had this year. You may not have heard anything about it, and that's a good thing, right? We've been able to put most of it on. There are wildfires that happen all the time in East Texas, all the time in Montgomery County. There's 2-3 acres in size, you'll never hear about it.
Is this early for the season to start, wildfire season?
You know, it's hard to define a particular season anymore, right?
Okay.
It can happen, it happens all year long. I would say, you know, there's probably a more of a defined season out west, California, Colorado area, New Mexico. If you're following New Mexico fires right now, the state's on fire. There's a nuclear plant in the middle of one of them that they're having to.
Y'all typically get called to go help.
As long as the homeland is safe, right, then we can go out. Right? I've been to Montana, Colorado, California on assignments, but that's when
As long as around here.
that's when Texas is doing okay. Right? Always, you know, stay here first. Because sometimes, even right now, we're not able to meet the demand of resources that we need to control fires in the state. So we pull in people all the time. You know, people from Utah, Idaho, Georgia, Florida, things like that. We pull those resources in all the time. We change hands, right? So when they need us, we go there. When we need them, they come here. Urban forest sustainability. The urban forest canopy provides economic, health, and environmental benefits. What can cities do to promote this green space and protect it and recognize it as an important part of their city landscapes? Tree Cities USA. Shenandoah is a Tree City USA. Conroe applied for one. Tree City USA, these cities are investing, you know, they have to invest a certain amount of tax dollars per capita back into their urban forest canopies to promote that. Right? That's how you get certified as a Tree City USA. You also have to have a designated Arbor Day. You also have to do things like managing. Who's going to manage your urban forest, right? Is it the city? Do you have a contractor or something like that? Okay, here's my plug for the Jones. If you need volunteer hours for Master Naturalist program, every Tuesday morning, there's a big group of Master Naturalists out here to help maintain the flower beds. There's a tree nursery here on the forest. They help maintain the tree nursery too. Caroline Cruz is our conservation education coordinator. If you enjoy working with youth, teaching students about the concepts of what you're learning in this class, we have field trips out here all the time. We rely heavily on the Master Naturalists to be able to serve as volunteers just guiding the kids or to serve as station hosts and lecturing and providing these educational opportunities to these kids.
She's a great person to talk to in general.
Great person to talk to in general. Yeah. We stole her from AgriLife. She worked for AgriLife for like 10 years. Excellent at her job. I couldn't tell you what she does. She throws up like teachers. They need some sort of like, you know, just like other people need certain continuing education needs, right? She knows what all these, she doesn't have a degree in teaching. She has a degree in ag science, but she's an informal educator. She understands what teachers need, and she knows how to talk their talk, right? Which is critical for us. She is the only position like hers in our entire agency, the only field education person right now. And rightfully so, being here because we're such an urban environment, right? Very high profile.
I brought my homeschool group here in March for her. And I mean, it was like we had kids from 3 to 10. And she was amazing.
Yeah.
Like all of the kids were just like, when can we come back? Like, we asked that.
We do a virtually wild program with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. If you're not familiar with that, we actually just won an award from TCEQ for it in the education category. But it's virtual field trips, right? All you need is a phone and a microphone and a tripod, and we can stream. I mean, there's hundreds of kids. Imagine that. I could never fit 300 kids in this classroom. But virtually on these virtual field trips, virtually Texas Wild, we can do that. And we talk about things like red cockaded woodpecker. We talk about prescribed burning. We talk about drones, how we use drones in forest management. They go to other different places as well. You know, they go to all the national wildlife refuges. They talk about that. They talk about pocket prairies in Houston, all sorts of different things.
So these are streamed in the classroom?
Streamed in the classrooms, as well as children's hospitals as well. They have
Where can I find this?
Education Service Center, Region 4, Houston area. They're the ones that host the platform, and then they broadcast it out to teachers. So, and it's free to join. Virtually Wild Texas, just give it a Google.
Can you repeat that again, please? Education?
Education Service Center, I think it's Region 4, USC.
Or just email Kiddo.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm well over time, I think. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So first I want to say phenomenal presentation.
Yes. Yes.
Second is, do you have contact information? You didn't provide your contact information.
Just bring me up the screen.
Thank you, Connor.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That was
Thank you.
great.
I ran over time. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
That was my fault.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone.
That was our question. Thank you so, so much. We are so excited that you were able to do this for us. The owl's working well.
Did you tell me about the owl? That's pretty cool.
I'm
gonna put mine on my notebook.
No longer the teacher's pet, Diana. No longer
Wait a minute.
This is Donna Work.
I didn't know I had that spouse.
Well, see.
You lost it now.
This is Donna Work, who does our red Cockaded Woodpeckers Duran. Hey, guys. Sorry. Eyes on me. Okay, bad students. There we have bad students. I'm taking names for teacher's pet and. Okay. Donna Work has been working with the red Cockaded Woodpeckers for a long time.
Since 96.
There we go, there we go. And these are her hands here in this picture. See? So I'm going to introduce her to wow you with her stories of climbing great heights and being afraid of this.
You've heard my spiel. All right, well, thank you very much. My degree is in wildlife biology from Texas A&M University. If I had any whoops, that would have been a teacher's pet thing. I didn't hear it. Okay, well, or who? Anyway, I didn't have any forestry except for one class, wildlife habitat management, and we even actually came up to East Texas. Little did I know I'd be moving to East Texas. And I've done it a few times. I said, I'm never going back to East Texas while I'm on my 30th time. So here I am for 31 years. But yeah, so I got forestry mainly on the job, and I started off with Texas A&M Forest Service in our forest pest management section. It was called pest control then. I worked on bark beetle research and seed pine cone insects and titmouse traps and things like that. So I did a lot of that. Then we started doing water resources type stuff. I was really interested in water. I love water. So I kind of tagged along with them, although that wasn't part of my job. And till I left and went to New Mexico, helped parents with the business, then came back, decided I didn't go up there to frame pictures. I came back here. And then I got with the still with pest control, and then got into the water resources, actually in the water resources program. And that is a majority of my job now. And we work with loggers and landowners and talk about using safe, sound logging practices that protect the soil and water. And then when the guy who was doing our woodpeckers on this forest at the Fairchild State Forest retired, then they asked me to do it. So I was one of the few wildlife biologists that we had. I said, yes, real wildlife instead of six-legged wildlife. But, which are fine, they're fine. And so I've been doing this as well. And so I'm going to get right off on the red cockaded woodpecker here. If you have any questions in between time, that's fine. I may do this pretty quickly because I want to save plenty of time for us to go out in the field and hopefully see and hear some. And it's not too far. We'll walk a little ways, but it's not too far. Okay, so I think it'll all make more sense to you if you see it this way. I'm usually by the screen where I can point, but I'll see where I need to be. I can't really point at that one very well. So if I'm right here, is that okay? Am I walking? Because I'm a walking talker. Let's see, I might have to do this. I don't know if this is going to give the little sound or not. Just doing their little talking and steam right there. All right, I put this up because there's a couple other woodpeckers that look very much like them. I've put this brochure up here before. It looks like some of y'all have got some of them of all the woodpeckers in East Texas. But you can see, this one is the red cockaded woodpecker right here. It's got the white, solid white cheek patch.
little bit of red, but that's hard to see, so it's hard to use that as an identifying characteristic. And then the one that looks the most like him is the downy woodpecker. This one's about 7 or 8, the red cockaded woodpecker, about 7 or 8 inches tall, about the size of a cardinal or a bluebird. The downy woodpecker is smaller, looks like the red cockaded woodpecker, has the red in the wrong place, but also the major thing that you can see out there, the cheek patch has got the black streak across it. And so does the hairy down here. So I have the black streak here. If it's a solid white cheek patch, then that is the red cockaded woodpecker. And I'll probably refer to them as RCW the rest of the time, or most of the time. I'm just not pointing this in the right way, I guess. Okay, where did I do this point this? There we go. Oh, it changed on here, but not up there. So what do I do with it?
Might have to click on the presentation.
Okay, let me just do that then. It's going through it up here, but not up there. Get that first slide up. There, this thing's up. That first one went through for me. Yeah, I told y'all were years above me and electronic stuff. Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. It's the other room. They're spying on us. Oh, that's y'all's. Okay. Now that's. Oh yeah, it's up to the owl where he points.
Are we still sharing?
No, it's just showing, I'm not seeing the screen. I'm not seeing the wall. Yep, share now. This is the PowerPoint presentation. In PowerPoint.
Okay. But it's not showing up there in PowerPoint. You still see it? Still share? Okay, good.
Yeah, we're seeing the next slide thing. He's got it.
You got it? Okay. And so that you see the other. Okay. Yeah, I decided to turn them upright in this next one. And I put an arrow in this one. I guess I put it there because woodpeckers, you know, they're hanging on the trees like this, so their tail feathers are pointed and really, really strong. And so I guess that's why I put that little blue arrow there. Oh, right there. It's the short tail, the spots. Okay, here's another shot of red cockaded woodpecker. You're seeing it everywhere? All these spots? Very good. Okay. So you can see it's almost like dots going across the back, what you would call a ladder back woodpecker. And there is another woodpecker, not in this area, but other areas that's called a ladder back woodpecker. But this has got a ladder back similar to that. You're not seeing any red or anything on the nape of the neck or anything like that. And again, there's the white cheek patch that's pretty characteristic. This is a male and a female. The female is on the left. She looks just like the male, except behind the eye, and what you think would be maybe be an ear or something, there's a patch of feathers, a red tiny patch of feathers on the male, and the male only, and that's called the cockade area. I think it has something to do with the military cap and putting a feather in the cap and that sort of thing. So it's only on the male, but otherwise they look just alike. This is a juvenile male that when they get their first set of feathers in, and when they're hatched, they're naked babies, they don't have feathers. When they get their first set of feathers in and are fully feathered out, the male young have the patch of red on top of their head. When their first molt in September or maybe October, and they get all their adult feathers in, then that patch on top of the head is gone, and the patch ends up on the side of the head. I put this in. Anybody know who did this? Audubon? Yes, John James Audubon. So I put this little segment in here because he wrote some articles on red cockaded woodpeckers, and it was interesting to me and very surprising, some things I read. And I'm just going to go through this real quick. It's and he was working in Bayou Sara in Louisiana. He slightly wounded 2 males. That caught my attention too, which I put into my hat in order to carry them home. The first, on being brought to the ground, was easily secured, but the case was different with the other. For it at once hopped off towards the nearest tree, crying loudly all the while. And on reaching it, ascended as if unhurt. However, I obtained it by accidentally knocking off the bark with a clod of earth. It defended itself courageously, which I know they can do that, and pecked at my fingers with so much vigor that I was obliged to let it drop several times out of my hand. Well, I would not have my permits, and I probably would not be a free woman now. If I did that. I thought, well, that's why I said, well, that's how he got all these fabulous paintings and everything. He had to obtain these specimens, whether dead or alive or whatever, so he could paint them. You know, just flitting around on trees, you can't get that. So I thought that's pretty amusing. Yeah, I know. That's right. And in vain, just learn that now it is, but back then not so. So this is their historic distribution across the U.S. and this doesn't go near that far north or northeast anymore. The current population is this map within, not totally solid within those gray areas, but within that is where the populations of woodpeckers are. You can see we're on the western end of it right here. And several of those states that we saw before no longer have red-pocket woodpeckers. In fact, you can take out that spot between Kentucky and Tennessee.
Oh, so Appalachia is no longer a sanctuary for them.
Right, right. They had, I don't remember the year, but it's been since I've been working, but several years ago, martin beetles killed all of their trees, all their habitat, and they live in live pine trees. So it killed all their trees, but fortunately, the people, you know, you could tell when the tree is dying. And so they were able to capture them and move them down south. So they moved the birds out, but their habitat is gone. So apparently they didn't have a wide range of area where they were to begin with. So there are no more up in that area.
Donna, so is habitat destruction the number one cause of their?
Do what?
Habitat destruction is not the number one reason that it's, that they're.
Yeah, yes. In fact, most endangered species, it's kind of like that. And these woodpeckers as well, loss of habitat. Whether it's through natural disasters like the beetle outbreaks or whatever, or men coming across the south, men and women, you know, men, you know, in general. Men did it all. So anyway, late 1800s, early 1900s, the pioneers coming across from the east, coming west, well, they were harvesting trees to either build their farmlands, build their corrals, build their houses, build their barns, that sort of thing, and because they were pioneering. And after a while, I guess they realized, well, if we keep this up, we're not going to have any more of these trees. And of course, it is a renewable natural resource, and they started planting back trees and that sort of thing. But when they were first coming across the south, they harvested a lot of trees for them to live. And then nowadays we know to plant back trees. We always have trees of all ages, all sizes growing. Still use the trees for all the wood products that we need every day, but still do it in a sustainable way. So habitat loss is usually the main thing for a lot of them, and it was for this woodpecker as well. So those large, mature trees that were harvested before, that was their habitat. This one right here was their historic range in Texas, East Texas, where these little outlying things like one in Fort Worth area, Tarrant County and Fort Worth area, and some of these places west, I don't know, maybe a hurricane or something blew them over that way because it doesn't have their habitat there. And I don't remember what kind of sightings those were, but over in the East Texas, that third of East Texas, that's their historic habitat. And now this is their current habitat. And actually you can probably take out Nacogdoches County, because the last ones of those birds were on some company property, and those trees died or were dying, and they moved those birds and put them on properties elsewhere. So there's no more in Nacogdoches County, and probably no more in Polk. They were on the Indian reservation, but we're not hearing much from there. Can you tell if we hear them talking or something? I don't know. Or is it me?
It's not a bird call I recognize.
But that's probably, and those, the solid pink up there, those are where there's the most woodpeckers and more sparse in the counties like Tyler and Trinity. And there, of course, we're down here in Montgomery County. And
internacional la quiere. O sea, no tiene el correo para mandar internacionalmente. Le pone. Por favor, mándala. We don't have anything to do.
Okay, so this is the type of habitat that they were used to. This is what they were adapted to way back when. These are the type of trees that were harvested way back when. And it was nice, open. Looks kind of crowded to us, but it was nice and open. They say you could ride a horse through it, and not get knocked off the horse by branches. But this is what the habitat was. And I've already discussed about the habitat, the harvesting of the trees as the pioneers came across the land. Nowadays, this is what in our woodpecker areas, this is what we want. They're the only woodpecker that builds their cavities that they roost in at night and that they nest in live pine trees. Other woodpeckers are going to use dead trees, or they may take over one of the red cockaded woodpecker cavity trees that's already built for them. And so live pine trees is what they use. They like nice open habitat, don't have the tall mid-story, that's the yopons and oaks and things that are coming up and get real tall. They don't like that real tall. They want a nice open flyway with some good herbaceous ground underneath there to incubate the insects that are going to crawl up the trees, and it's part of their diet there. So this is how we try to maintain our habitats as best we can here. They like the larger, older pine trees that have a disease called red heart rot in the center, and often that red heart rot manifests itself on the outside of the tree with a conch. This is a conch right there, and you can, so it's like basically a little mushroom that's coming out from it's a fungus, so the fungus is kind of coming out on that side. You don't always see that, but you do see it at times. And if you're pecking your beak against a tree and you're building your own cavity, you want the heartwood to be as soft as you can get it. So the red heart rot doesn't kill the tree, but it softens that heartwood of the tree to where it's not so hard and they can excavate their cavities. So that's what this is, a tree right here in the center. You can see how the heartwood of it has been softened. And this is a start hole where the woodpeckers have started to build a cavity. It's perfectly round, it's nice and conical in there. It's easy to mix any work on a tree mix that up with red cockaded woodpecker. A pileated woodpecker, if he was pecking around looking for holes, a pileated feeding hole is usually rectangular and real jagged inside. But this is conical, smooth, and we can tell that that's a start tree for the red cockaded woodpeckers. This is a completed cavity where you see that little hole there is only about 2 inches in diameter. And then around it, once it's complete, they've dug into the center of the tree, they've gone down 6, 7, or 8 inches, and the cavity is completed. It's about 3 inches wide in there, and just one bird uses it at a time, except during nesting season. And then once they're done, they're going to peck little what we call resin wells. You see the little holes that are around there, and there's sap flowing out of it. And the sap, especially when you see it from a distance, and there's a lot of it, it looks like melted candle wax. So they peck through the bark layer and get to the sap layer and let that flow down. And that is a banner for, they're pretty territorial. So if there's other red cockaded woodpeckers flying by, they see that, it's fresh sap, so it's a banner that says, hey, this place is taken. It also helps them if they're trying to evade a predator like a hawk or an owl or something like this, and they're flying through, it helps them to see that little cavity entrance, boom, they can get right in there. But mainly it is a deterrent to their major predator, the rat snake, which can climb right up the rough furrowed bark of a pine tree. They'll climb up brick buildings and things like that. But they can get in there and get the eggs. They can get the young. So that's their major predator that they have to look out for.
How does the sap keep the rat snake out?
Well, every morning when they get up, they work on those sap wells to keep fresh sap flowing. And if the snake starts up there, it's going to get in and irritate his belly scales. So it irritates him and makes him back off or even fall off the tree. And he can't get in there, or doesn't get in there. So it somehow gets in, it can gum them up, the belly scales that they use for manipulating the ground and the trees to get up in there. So that's another good reason for them not to have a lot of other trees out there, tall, mature trees around it, because if it has a good sap layer, well, then the predators could bypass that by going up to the neighboring oak tree, get on the limb, and still get in there. So they don't like to have other trees around them that close. There's a close-up of it. This is what we call an active cavity tree. You may see some of these out there, and the sap doesn't look sticky. It looks kind of amber yellow, amber color, or gray. If it's been inactive for a long time, that means they used it in the past, but haven't used it in a long time. And this right here, you can see where the bark on the outside of the tree is often kind of grayish, but they've pecked through that bark enough where you see the reddish part of the bark. So if they're actively using it, you'll see the reddish part of the bark, and the sap's going to look fresh and sticky, especially if the sun's hitting it. And that's more what it looks like inside. It's got a little dip to the outside to kind of keep water out, hopefully. and then also help keep sap off of them as they go inside. This is a well-advanced tree. It has what we call a plate on it. The bark's been chipped totally off of it, but they're still able to get sap on there. This is what it looks like inside, a natural cavity that they've built. So it looks like that inside, and that's just simple. They don't bring in nesting material. They don't, even when there's eggs and young, they don't bring in leaves or fur or anything else. They just chip away at the wood inside there and have a few little pieces of like sawdust, or not sawdust, but the chips, the wood chips in there. One of the major things that has helped these woodpeckers out and helped them to advance are these artificial inserts, artificial cavities, and they were invented back in 1990, early 90s, because Hurricane Hugo, when it came across the East Coast and hit the Carolinas, it wiped out a lot of woodpecker habitat. So, well, it takes these birds a year or more to build these cavities, and they're going to be roosting out in the open. They're susceptible to the weather and the predators. So they came up with these boxes that they can actually insert into the tree. And I think I've got some slides with that put into the tree. It's cedar, a block of cedar wood where they've drilled a hole down this way, down to the bottom, and then a hole this way for the entrance. They put that armature on the front of it because other woodpeckers, like the red bellies and the pileated woodpeckers, will try to peck and make the hole bigger so they can take it over. And so it helps discourage that. And nowadays they even put the PVC pipe in there on the inside of the cavity. That just keeps the other woodpeckers from enlarging that cavity. And if it's enlarged, the RCWs aren't going to feel safe and they won't use it anymore. That's what that looks like inside without the armature on it. But you can see it's similar in shape and space that's in there. But it's real handy. It can take someone with a short barred chainsaw about 30 minutes to put it in, whereas the woodpecker's building it a year or more. And that's what it looks like inside with my old peeper scope. And you see it's perfectly round, but it's perfectly useful to these birds. And that's what's helped beef their populations up, because you can automatically quickly put up some homes for them and they can take that over right away. Yes.
And that's inserted inside the tree?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, they'll see some pictures here. It's flush up against the tree. We try to make it look as natural as we can. I don't know if that's next or not. Okay, good. So here's the guy up in the tree with a short barred, about 12-inch chainsaw, climbed up into the tree. He's had the training. He has the permits to do it. You have to have a permit to do this. And cuts away a rectangle right here. And we hired the contractors to do this thing. I don't have to do this. When I first started working with the woodpeckers, the guy before me did it himself. I think, man, I haven't used a chainsaw before, and I'm not going to do it at 30 feet. You know, so they said, "Oh, we'll just contract it out." So, so they cut out a chunk like this. You know, they take it out in chunks, and they have to chisel them out. They don't pull out the whole block at once. They have to kind of chisel it out. So that's what it looks like inside the tree. And that's what it looks like when you put that insert or the artificial cavity in there. They put putty all around it. You know, after they drill that hole down this way, they put some plywood on top to help keep sap out of it. But they still want to put putty all around it so sap doesn't get inside here. And that's what it is. It gets flushed against the tree. They putty that up. They're going to spray it with brown paint so it looks pretty natural. If it doesn't already have the little armature, the mesh on the front, we put that on up there. And then it's all spray painted brown, and then he takes either some of that carpenter's putty that he used on there or spray paint, which he used here, and paints these little white streaks up and down it. Why do you think he would do those streaks?
Simulate the sap.
Simulate the sap. Yeah, simulate the sap that the woodpeckers do. That kind of catches their eye. So it simulates the sap, and then once the woodpecker says, "Well, nobody's using it, I'm going to use it." So once he's in there, then he or she, then they will start picking away and make the real sap. But that does simulate the sap and kind of catches their eye.
So they will use like old holes, like if a woodpecker, like going to then have to move down and find one.
Yeah.
They'll use it.
Now, if it's real, sometimes they get real funky inside and dirty, or some other critter takes it over, like a flying squirrel or something else like that. But they will. I've seen them go into old. If they didn't have any other options, they go into something older and reuse, whether it's artificial cavities or even old and natural cavities. I've seen them do that if they didn't have something fresher to do. This is how we mark them. We mark all our individual trees with green paint and with a little metal band with a number on it. And Donna gets her act together and gets the new trees labeled. And so this is an area where they've put in 4 artificial cavities out here. It's an old area where the woodpeckers used to be. This is on the Fairchild State Forest. and we were gonna move birds into it, so we had to have a new place where birds hadn't been living for a while and put in new cavities. So this is an example of the cluster area. You might hear some of the terminology. The cluster is the grouping of trees that the woodpeckers are using now or have used in the past, that grouping of trees plus kind of like a 20-foot buffer around it. So that's the immediate area around where the woodpeckers are going to use it. This is in inactive clusters because the woodpeckers aren't using it, but it's still called a cluster whether they've moved in it or not. And that's just the trees themselves and the trees all around them. The foraging habitat includes this plus 100+ acres around them as well. So if you hear me say cluster area, that's just where they live, and group is the actual birds themselves, a family. Yes, sir.
If you put in the nest, you have to face in a certain direction, like south?
They try to, and it's kind of an east-west thing, I think. They want to face it towards the evening sun, I think, so that when the sun hits it, the sap will still flow fresh on it. But you find them all directions. When I first started doing this, it's they played it on the east side or the west side or something like that. But really, whatever works best with the layout of the tree is where they put it. But they do try to face them either east or west so the sun will hit it at sometimes. But it's not always exactly that.
Do both males and females create cavities?
Yep. Yeah, any family member can create one, and they're each going to have their own cavity that they're going to stay inside at night. This is an example of, they're getting, this is a pine tree, and it did have one of those artificial inserts in it because it has the spray paint on it, but it died. So something killed it, but the insects that came in after the tree died makes a nice buffet of the woodpeckers around there. So that's what this one's doing. You found a buffet, probably on this pine sawyers, and found the little grub worm out of there, and that's what they're going to eat or take it to the young if they have them or whatever. So when they go, after they come out in the mornings, and they're the last bird to get up, they're the first one to go to bed. And if it's cold or rainy outside, they wait even longer, even if I'm out there waiting for them to get up to count them. But they'll get up, they're the last one to get up, but after they peck on their resin wheels a little bit, they all meet together at the male's cavity tree, and then they go off on the forest foraging. You may not see them for a while till dusk dark. And when they're foraging, they're looking mainly on pine trees, but sometimes on hardwoods, or especially dead trees where there's larvae in there, and there's a little bit of berry in their diet. But it's mostly on pine trees or flaking away bark, looking for scorpions, ants, other insect larvae, centipedes and things like that, flaking away the bark or in a dead tree or something like that. Rarely do I see them on the ground. I did one time because there was a log on the ground. I guess it had enough insects where they felt okay doing that. But rarely are they very low. And this is the young. An ideal family group is a breeding male and a breeding female and a helper bird or two. And the helper birds are almost always male, and they're previous offsprings of previous hatches. So they help the family to defend the territory. They help the family to incubate the eggs when there's eggs. They help them to feed the young when there's young. And really, they're just waiting around for dad to kick off so that male can take up the top breeding spot, find his own female, and keep the family going. So an ideal family group is going to have, besides the breeding male or female, they're going to have a helper bird or two, and that helps the family to be stronger and to live better. This is one of the family members, and they're coming to feed this young, and the eggs are laid. After all the eggs are laid, it takes 10 to 12 days for them to hatch, and once they hatch, then it takes 26 days for them to fledge to leave the nest. So this one is, if he's big enough to stick his head out right there, that tells me he's probably 24, 25, or 26 days old if he's that big and all fully feathered and ready to come out. But they're still feeding right now.
How many eggs at a time are usually?
3 to 4. A lot of times I see 3 and a lot of times 4. One time I found 5, but not all of those hatched. But I've had 4 and all 4 hatched. I've had 3 and maybe 1, 2, or 3 hatched.
And if all 4 of them hatched, then what's the general mortality rate of the hatchlings?
The best way I can keep track of them is when they are in the nest. So when I've had whatever hatchlings are there, I can figure out if they've fledged or not. But after that, even with the bands, I'm not out here 24/7, so I can't keep up with them. But at least through the nesting period and leaving the nest, usually all of them will leave. And I have seen some like, oh, there was 3 chicks in here before, but 2 of them are gone, and I don't know what happened. Because if a snake gets in there, it usually takes everything and no evidence and he's gone. So I don't know what happened there. One may have died and the parents threw them out. So, but the, however many eggs are laid, that's not always how many hatch, but those that do hatch, usually it's a pretty good rate of survivability. Just one brood per year. And let's see if I've got an egg picture next here. Oh, okay, this is how I peep in there. Yeah, we'll have some egg pictures here in just a little bit. This is a peeper scope, which I'll demonstrate when we're out in the field. And on the end, on the right-hand side, you'll see the little black probe there. It's got a camera and 2 lights in it. And it's on a telescoping pole, which is essentially a surveyor's pole that will extend up. And once I get that inside the cavity, I've got a monitor down here, and I can see what I'm seeing in the cavity. So there you go. I've got it in the cavity tree here on the ground. I've got a monitor, and I can see what's inside the nest cavity. And there's eggs right there. They will lay, and we're right in the middle of nesting season. So right now we've got some eggs. At least the other day we had some eggs out there now where we're going. Hopefully they've hatched by now because it's probably about time that they did. And if the clutch is successful, if they hatch some young, if they fledge successfully, that's it. That's it for the season. If something comes in like these eggs, if a snake had come in or a flying squirrel or something had come in and taken the eggs and left, then they may re-nest. So they will sometimes re-nest in the same tree and try to have a brood then. But basically it's just one a year.
What happens if one of the parents are in there with trying to say,
Oh, and I hate for that to happen because I've had one try to get out before it gets stuck. Said, "Oh, but we got it out." But yeah, once in a while we do that, and they're scared. They probably, this dark thing, and their major predator is a snake. What do they think? And sometimes they'll pick at that, sometimes they'll hunker down, or they try to get out. So they get pretty ticked off at you. But usually, if there's one in there, by the time I walk up there, it flies out while I'm trying to get in there. But that has happened before. And the female lays her eggs in the male's cavity tree. Each bird in the family has their own cavity tree where they go to roost at night. She lays hers in the male's cavity tree because his is usually the cleanest, newest cavity, best resin producing tree, so it's highly protected and it's in good shape. So she lays her eggs in the male's cavity tree, 1 egg a day until she's done laying eggs. And then they take turn at night. Dad has to go to roost, so he's sitting on the eggs. And they're there. So if all the eggs are hatched, they take turns during the day. And take care of the hatching. When they hatch, Dad has to sleep with the kids all night until they fledge. So with 3 or 4 little, full-grown babies just about to fledge. Here they are close up.
Do they change mates per year or?
No, they don't. They stay mated together unless something happens to one of them. So
Okay,
if something.
So they tend to mate for life if they can.
Yes, but they will take on another mate if something happens. Like if one of them dies, they will accept another mate and continue on. But otherwise, if they've got the same mate, they're for life, and they're not migratory, so they stay here year round. Yeah, this is one of those incidents where there wasn't a bird in there when we went over feeding. But you let me see for sure. Okay, there's at least 2 eggs in there. So when I saw that, I said, "Oh, I got out of there pretty quick."
What is the season, their mating season?
Officially, it's like middle of March to middle of July, but around here, they start laying eggs middle of April. And this year, they were a little late. I think a lot of things like dogwoods, for me, at least where we were late blooming. So I think everything was a little late, because we had some late cold snaps. But usually, laying eggs around here, middle of April. I'm usually banding by 1st or 2nd week of May, and then on. If they have to re-nest at some point, the brood may go into June, but by that time it gets really hot and things don't survive once it gets that far. So usually, actually laying eggs and everything April through all the way through May and a little bit into June. This picture was taken. If you recognize the name Debbie Lair, y'all may not know her, but she we lost Debbie a couple years ago, I guess now. And this is an awesome shot. And she was a Parkwood, Texas Master Naturalist, and she was an excellent birder. I learned a lot from her. And this one I call the shift change. The woodpeckers don't have that little yellow on them, but I've seen a few pictures where there's yellow. I think it has a light, if they're white. But this is a shift change, like once in a lifetime sight, and once in a lifetime Photoshop, where one bird was in there, maybe incubating the eggs or feeding the little ones, and the other one came up, okay, my turn. That one was out of there. So I think that's a pretty cool picture. And here's after the nestling is hatched. The other eggs haven't hatched yet. Just naked little, they're blind, they can't see. There's nothing trying to come out of the other egg on the left-hand side. So this paper gives me a lot of information. When I see this, okay, I said, I know those chicks are hatching today. So I can count this as ground zero of how old they are, and I know how long I can wait to come back. So I like to random when they're 6 or 7 or 8 days old. 7 days is my primo time. I like to do that. So I could say, okay, they're 0 today, and I can count back before I come back.
Okay, they're in the nest, 2 inch hole.
Yeah.
How do you get the bird out the band?
Oh, good. I've got some footage here to show you that. Oh, that's one of the adults. They keep it pretty clean in there. So the little baby poop, this is the buccal sac where they have the little bird poop and they just toss it out. Or the eggshells, they eventually toss that out. And so they try to keep it pretty clean in there. And then the whole family group starts taking turns. Yeah, they go off and forage for food for them to eat, but they're also bringing stuff back. Usually pretty often every 10 or maybe 15 minutes. And feeding the baby birds. And this one's about 9 days old right there. And that one, and this one, can you tell what gender that bird is? Male, right. You can see the little tiny patch on top of his head. So he's getting ready to fledge. If they can stick their head out that far, they're getting ready to fledge.
When they dispose of like the waste matter and stuff like that, they fly away from the roost, or did they just drop it?
It looked like in this picture they just drop it down there. I've seen eggshells just right down by the tree, but you know other little, and it doesn't take long for other little critters to come by and just pick that up. But it's not like, go hide the poops or predator. They don't know that we're here. I think they just drop it out of the tree. Okay. They've got me thinking, yeah. They may take it off, but I think pretty much they drop it there by the tree. But I know the eggshells go by the tree. Oh my, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is me trying to capture a baby bird. And I have got, I've already peepered in there. I know how old they are, or maybe I peepered the week before and then I could hear them the next week. Well, they're still alive, they're still there. So I don't have to peeper again if I know their age. We're only supposed to capture them between 5 and 10 days old. Well, around here, if you wait till 10 days and sometimes 9 days, their eyes are starting to open and they're harder to catch. But I've got some surgical tubing, which I'll show you an example out in the field. I didn't bring one here. And this is one of those artificial cavities I forgot to point out right there. But and a surgical tubing, I've got 50-pound test line on it. I pull out my little nooses. When I climb up in the tree, the baby birds are there and their eyes are closed, but even with our eyes closed, you can tell when there's a shadow there if we put our hand up. So I put my hand over the tree, and what do you think the baby birds are thinking? So what do baby birds do? Stick their heads up, chirp, chirp, chirp. That's what I want, because I've passed my noose down in there. I can't get my hands in there. I just stick my little noose down that little 2-inch hole. And I know I hit bottom, I pull back and it closes up my little nooses. And hopefully I've got 1 or 2. I've gotten a record 3 before. But pull them out. And there's my noose, there's the baby bird. You may can see its little feet sticking up right there. So I've got the baby bird, I'm holding my breath at this point, and I take it out and I put it in a soft little bag that's on my side. There's my soft little bag. So if he's out of there, and again, still holding my breath, don't want to drop an endangered species. So I put him in my bag. I keep fishing until I get all, or at least all that I can get. And then I lower the bag down to the ground, and there I get my banding pliers, band them with a unique number of the Fish and Wildlife Service band, or actually now it's USGS band, just like on ducks. But it's much smaller. It's got a unique number on there. And then we have auxiliary markers, little plastic beads that have a slit in them. And I can slide that on there, put the little baby bird leg in there, and pull out my little device, the spoon device, and they're banded for life. So it's got the jewelry on right there. The reason for the colored auxiliary bands was so, because if you're out there, the birds in the tree, and you can see the bands with the spotting scope, no way you're going to read that number. So to know each bird, they each have a different color combination. So if I find a color combination on my forest, or if another forest finds a color combination, it's like, it's not, we don't have a bird with that combination. We call each other. Like I've gotten one from the San Houston before, and vice versa, they've gotten one of ours before. So it's just a way we're out in the field with good binoculars or spotting scope, you can see the color combinations. And then when I'm done, climb back up the ladder, pull up my little soft bag, and plop them into the tree. They're like little rubber gummy bears down there. So I plop down the tree. The whole time the parents are fussing at me, but they're not dive bombing. Thank goodness. It's not Maldives or anything like that. So once I get my ladders off the tree, the adults keep coming back like normal, going back to feed. Mission accomplished. Yes.
when you say the word noose, like, I think of a noose.
Oh,
How do you not like kill them?
I go very gently, and when I know I've got them, I slowly pull it out and then quickly take them out of it. It's usually around their necks, but sometimes I've gotten them by me.
Oh, okay.
But it's the Fish and Wildlife Service accepted way to do it, and it'll make more sense when you see my device out there. But yeah, yeah, again, I'm only on my breath the whole time. Yeah,
I mean, when they're babies, the necks are quite elastic because, you know, the parents still have to regurgitate the food into their mouths, so.
Right.
So they can fit the beast.
And that's I kind of describe them as little gummy bears, they're little soft and mobile, and that sort of thing. Yeah, drop them in the bottom. I mentioned the rat snakes before, but this is flying squirrel. Yeah, they're cute, they're soft, I think they're a neat critter, but they are a problem because they're cavity dwellers as well. And here's a ready-made cavity, we can come right on here. Of course, they're nocturnal, do their thing, and during the day, the woodpeckers are out, so they can come in there. But if they go into a nest, they can crush and eat the eggs, they can kill the young, they can eat the young. So when we find those in an active cavity tree, I need to take them out. I move them elsewhere. Let's see, there they are. And usually it's multiples. It's like, I've seen 3, often 4. I've heard of people with 5, 6, or 7. It's often multiples, and that's not babies, it's just acting they're adults.
Do you noose them out?
I don't noose them out. The old way was climb up in the ladder and take starter fluid, which is ether, and you squirt, and they're don't inhale that, and it knocks them out enough to where you get these little, like a grabbers, like a mechanic will use, like you drop some screw down in the motor and grab it like this, and stick those in there and pull them out. And then I keep have a little cage here. Now, most people just dispose of them. I can't do that. So I put them in a little cage and I go release them somewhere. And don't tell Huntsville State Park, but they've got. Similar habit, and I go by the creek, and they can go tree to tree in there, and so I release them there. So, we've got a good squirrel population.
How do 4 or 5 fit in one?
I don't know, they just pack in there and it doesn't look comfortable at all. But that was the old way of extracting them. But thank you, Heartland Master Naturalists. Years ago, I've seen people in Arkansas, they have these backpack vacuum cleaners like they use on airlines and hotels like this. And it's a backpack, you still have a generator to run it, but they had a little hose and they sucked them. How easy is that? And then I looked them up online, they were like $500. I can't ask Bill Oates, our associate director, for $500 for vacuum cleaner. But the Heartland Naturalists came through and they got one, so I could climb up there and stick my little hose up there. And there's YouTube video online with it. And suck them out. There's no blades in there. It's not a vegematic thing, but suck them out. They get inside the canister, and I crawl down to the ground and take them out. And they're really ticked off, but I have to be careful. I lost 1 or 2, but transporting from that to my cage, which is the top left there. And then they're in that cage, and I take them off somewhere. So that's how I get rid of them. And there's the rat snake, the major predator right there.
And doesn't the vacuum suck up the little baby birds too?
No, they're gone.
Oh, no, there's no birds in it. That's just for the squirrels. If the squirrels are in it, there's no woodpeckers in it. If there were, they've eaten the eggs or whatever. But usually they're just in a nest, not during nesting season. But if it is, I usually don't do that during nesting season to disturb the birds, and we don't want to disturb them too much during the nesting or breeding season. But if it is an active tree that I know the birds have been using and the birds have been nesting in it for a long time, this is probably discouraging them from that, then I'll do it during nesting season. But yeah, there's no woodpeckers harmed in this. And I promised the master naturalist I wouldn't do it if there was baby squirrels in it. And so I've never had that trouble. I can't get them before there's babies. So the first time I did it, I say it goes down the canister, and sometimes they do. Ideally, and 75 or 80% of the time, when I get them, it sucks on the side of their body, and I pull it out, and then I get my glove, I hold the squirrel and turn off the vacuum cleaner, it lets go of the suction, then I put it in here. That's 75 or 80% of the time or more. Sometimes they go through. They turn wrong or they're smaller, I don't know what. But the first time I was doing it, I came out here, I told our then forester, I said, I can come out, I've got the vacuum cleaner, I've been practicing in my office with that thing, and I put a bottle in there, medicine bottle, and I was sucking it out, so I practiced. If I want to come here, okay, fine. And I said, well, I need a ground crew, so I need somebody to help me, but I was just trying to do it incognito. When I got here, he said, oh, so-and-so from Parks and Wildlife is here. And oh, so the National Nationals are here. I said, oh, no, please don't lie. And at the end, the first time, I said, wow, this is working good. Yeah. But then in the video that was taken, nobody knows it but me and people that I tell. But there's one point when I stick it in there, and I caught some, and I stick it in there, and all of a sudden, that is the first time I went down the hose. I said, so I said, I gotta go down. There's a squirrel in the canister down there. And he was okay. He's kind of dazed, but he was okay. Oh no, but it's all right. So since then, it's happened before, and I don't worry about him too much. But I don't keep sucking very long because I don't know if that takes the air out a lot. So I just or messes them up. So I just take them out, put them in a cage, and go back up. Rat snakes there. These are southern pine beetles. When you have I saw one of your slides and was southern pine beetles, so they can be a menace. They're attracted to these trees because all that sap smell puts out the alpha pinings that attract the beetles. So they tend to attack these trees, and that can be a big killer of the trees. Even the ips and graver beetles can do that. There's ips, some little pitch tubes from ips and graver beetles. So the bark beetles can actually kill these trees and be a menace for them as well. So like those in Kentucky/Tennessee area, that's what happened. Bark beetles got into the trees and killed them all. Storms, these were straight line winds, and it was February of 1990 something, I forget the year. I used to remember that year. But anyway, straight line winds, this was probably in the Sabine National Forest because that's where it's worst hit. I mean, they took down in Lufkin, and they took down trees in Lufkin. But this was in had the Sabine National Forest there in that county, and took down, you see the green stripe, that was woodpecker trees. Woodpeckers were living out there. They didn't have a place to go. So they got together biologists who could put in the artificial inserts, and they worked all day putting in the artificial inserts in a nearby area that didn't get damaged. And the one guy said that after I put in my first artificial insert, I put my chainsaw in the back of the truck, and here came a woodpecker, and it plopped right in there. So you can see those are very handy tools to have to help expand populations, but also to replace trees that have been damaged. That putting in those inserts does not kill the tree. Everybody says, well, it kills the tree. It doesn't. We're not girdling the whole tree, but it does tend to make it a little weaker there. So this is one of the hurricanes, Ike or Rita, came through, and the winds blew it and broke it off at the cavity. So the artificial cavities and the natural cavities, the trees are a little bit weaker then. So with high storms, you can get damage there. But the red hot rod, ignore those putting in the insert, kill the tree.
Can you salvage one of the artificial inserts if the tree's been struck by lightning?
You could, in fact, I've got one that's been blown out of a tree like that, but usually it's kind of damaged. It's easier, and it's hard for them to kind of chop away everything and get that artificial cavity out. Or if there's one already in the tree and we just need something better, it's hard for them to chop that out and put it in a new box, so they would rather just put it in a new box. So I've salvaged one that came out of a broken tree just for educational purposes. This is a type of habitat they like, nice, open, mature pine forest, good herbaceous layer, I already mentioned that. This is a lot of times what we get in areas, this is the yaupon, this is the sweet gums and things like that getting bigger. The taller it gets, the higher the woodpeckers build their cavities, and also the more danger they feel like they're in, so they're gonna leave. So we have to take care of this. And there's a few ways to do that. Prescribed burn is a very good way. And I don't know if Connor talked about it, but here we're next to I-45. There's an airport not too far. We can throw rocks on 3 sides of the forest and hit houses. So our burning program has to be, just spot on, perfect weather, and small chunks of land at once. And we don't have as much freedom to do as much burning as we would other places. But this is a very good tool for the health of the forest, but also keeping that brush down. So that's one way to do it. And you can see the greenery, it gets the bushes and things that we don't want there. Of course, some of them may sprout back, but we can do that again. But also the greenery pops up pretty quickly. You can see the greenery already popping up right here, right there. But another way to do it are these mulching machines, and these are just awesome. They can get into the bigger, taller stuff that you don't want to burn because there's too much fuel out there and it could hurt the trees. And so they can get into this bigger, taller stuff with these little chopping heads on the front. And let's see if this will work. Yeah, they call them forestry mulchers or forestry mowers there. Yeah. Oh wait, here we go. I could do that.
Can this also be done manually, like just with a machete?
Yeah. In fact, I'll show you a picture of that, but it's not very practical for acres. Okay, my video didn't work, but it just basically goes and moves it down. That's a smaller one right there. And this is what it looks like afterwards. It doesn't have to be perfect golf course. You know, it has to have a lot of the stem, take a lot of the stems down, but it doesn't have to be, you don't want bare soil anyway, because you want that herbaceous layer to grow up and grow up quickly. You don't want soil movement. So this is what it looks like afterwards. Here's a before out here on this forest, and here's an after. And it's a big, great tool. However, if you don't follow up with it, what, next year or two with herbicide or prescribed burning, it really ticks off the vegetation. It comes back even worse. So I've seen some people like in Lufkin, some people did their big, big tract of their land and said, you have to follow up with that pretty soon. Oh no, it looks great now. Nope, everything's coming back with a vengeance. So we do have to follow up sometimes with herbicide spray and do it by hand. Call the Eagle Scouts. The Eagle Scout candidates, we have a lot of them come up here to do work. When they're working with an endangered species, they get their projects approved because they're improving red cockaded woodpecker habitat, and get their axes and bow saws and machetes. See the guys in the middle there with their machetes? They like to get out there and do that with the hatchets and things like that.
That also qualifies them for the Hornaday Award.
It could, yes. I've had one do go as far as Hornaday, but most of them are Eagle Scout candidates. And they do this, they bring out a crew. Part of that is leadership. They have to lead a crew. They have to come up with the tools and safety, have a safety plan and all that. So get all those Boy Scouts out there with their hatchets and bow saws and axes and things like that. And you can get that. But it is limited on how much they can do. So usually I tell them, okay, here are some trees that need clearing around them, clear a 50-foot radius around those trees. And usually a group can get in a day or day and a half, get all their hours and everything they need. But we only have an area done around 3 trees. So it's of course less than an acre. It's impractical for anybody to do it by hand over that far. But it's immediately around the trees are the most important place. So that's why I have them do it. And again, we have to follow up in years afterwards to do that. I've had master naturalists come in. These folks were great. Most of them are Heartwood. I think there was a few Gulf Coast, maybe another chapter came in. But we were approved to, one way to improve populations is to bring in birds, unrelated birds from other populations. And so we were approved to translocate, bring in pairs of birds, at this time it was Louisiana, into our forest, put them in an area where the birds were not, and try to start a new group there. And we already had our artificial caddies, everything put in there, or we're going to, and we put out the calls. And this mulching is very, very expensive. And this was before we even had our own mulchers, so it's very, very, it's very expensive. So the master naturalist said, we'll go out there. And this was like July and August. Yeah, the meeting was in the middle of August. I had to have it done in July. And they were so enthusiastic. They came out there. This was cluster 11, one we had down there, and they could just use hand tools. And I made a schedule. I said, y'all get out of the woods at noon. Don't stay out here longer because it was just so hot. You know how hot it is. But they were. Oh, really? All right. Please. Yeah. I don't know if Mary Finley's still involved or Barbara. But yeah, they were all gung ho, and look what they did. I mean, and Cream, I see Cream's still around. Yeah. And he helps me out a lot. He sometimes does presentations for me. Well, this type of habitat, so getting the habitat straight is intensive, but we can use natural and artificial means to kind of get it back to the state that it needs to be. When we're managing for red cockaded woodpecker or other species, we're not managing just for that species. Well, we're burning for the woodpecker or we're doing the habitat for the woodpecker, but it helps improve the health of the forest, and other rare and even common species also benefit from all that. So the bobwhite quail likes the same type of habitat. The Bachman's or Bachman sparrow, is how it's supposed to be pronounced. Bachman sparrow likes the same type of habitat. Louisiana pine snake, probably the most rare snake in the world, but was listed as threatened not too long ago. It likes the same open, it needs the sandy soils as well, but open type habitat. And Texas trailing phlox, which is a rare plant, and likes the same type of habitat. So recovery efforts, I already talked a little bit about bringing in, there we go, birds from another place. We wait till we know where they are. We wait till they go to roost. We have some aluminum poles. We stack them one on top of each other. There's a wire frame with a mist net on it. and we plop it over the hole, let the birds go in to roost. We bang on the tree, roust them up, and ideally they fly out and they get tangled up in the net. And like Audubon said, yes, they will peck away voraciously at your knuckles. And they're screaming bloody murder, and it's at night, and it's really dark and quiet. And so bloody murder, and take them out and then put them in a cage. And in this case, it came from the Louisiana, the Cockaded National Forest. They put that bird in there. They know it's a juvenile. They've been monitoring. They know which one it is. They read the bands. They know it's the correct birds. So they get a male and female, unrelated male and female. They give it to us, who are receiving the birds, and we put them up there. The first time we did it here, I had broken this hand, and a big point of my career, and I couldn't climb up and do it. But we had graciously had someone from Raven Environmental volunteer, hey, I'll come do it. So this is 3 in the morning. I had to go to Louisiana, meet at the border. They couldn't cross the border, so I had to meet at the border and bring the birds here, a 3-hour drive back to here. And so they made it in there. Once we plopped the birds in their new cavity, new artificial cavity, put it in there, plop the birds in there. We have to screen it up because they've been pulled from their homeland. They've had to travel with me, listen to me sing for 3 hours. And then they got grabbed and stuffed into a hole. So they would freak out and just get it beaten by an owl, so it'd all be forgotten. So we covered up with the mesh, tie a string on it. Once they're in there, we come back out a few hours later. In this case, it was like 2 hours later. And after daybreak, when they start pecking on the screen, when they would normally come out of the cavity, we all synchronized, pull on the string, and had some volunteers there. And one guy, this photographer, brought his daughter, and he did these wonderful photos of the birds being released. So they all fly, come together, they swap, fly around a little bit, they kind of meet, hopefully fall in love and stay there. Well, most of the times they do not. So I found out that was pretty common, that they don't always stay right where you put them, but they will fly. They will fly around and find a place in the population. We do have them here. So these are just pictures from our last one. The birds coming out. Here's the current status. The Sam Houston has the most of them here in Texas. So that's the top line. The Davy Crockett, Angelina and Sabine are the next ones. So it shows slightly growing populations and kind of holding their own here in Texas. I'm not going to go through this. We can talk about that in the field. Where can you see woodpeckers? Of course, on all 4 of our national forests. And right here on the Jones State Forest, you can see how urbanized we are around here. That's where that little upside down bell-shaped place. So you know about us here. We have them on the Fairchild State Forest, and a population of a few there. We're on the Piney Woods and Prairies Trail down here on the Upper Post Trail, right near Maydale, Texas, right there. Pretty isolated as well from other woodpeckers, and on all the national forests. And Waiting Springs, that's a cool place. If you ever want to go there, I can tell you where to see them, and pitcher plants, and a neat old sawmill. How y'all can help would be if you're out birding or taking photos, if you see a bird and you can see the bands, write down or make a mental note of the color combination on whichever leg, color combination, write that down. Even if you just capture a couple of them, the colored bands, write those down. That'll help me know what bird that is. This is a very recent one that somebody sent a picture of and said, that's one of this 2021 Louisiana birds. So I said, yes, I didn't know where they were. I hadn't seen any sightings. But and there's another one with that color combination. So it looks like 2 of them. We put them on the south side of the forest and moved up here. But even if you see just a few bands, if I can see those band colors, this one was very recent. It was reported to the USGS. The USGS contacted me and said, well, do you recognize this bird? Well, the bands. And what is its number? I said, yes. And that's when I banded in 2020. So finding a new tree that looks like this, or you suspect looks like that, or the band colors, that's what I need information from y'all. So hopefully working all together, we can help keep this bird going strong. And Carol,
when I say I need some feedback, I really support our whole thing. Oh, this is so yeah. But I don't need that, but I do need somebody to tell me up, down, left, or right pretty quickly. When I get this close, it's gonna take me a while to get this close. When I get this and turn towards the tree, I need pretty quick feedback because every move, it's like a circus pole. Every move is exaggerated.
Yeah.
So I need up, down, left, or right, 1 inch, 2 feet, whatever it is. I think I can remember.
Isn't this exciting?
I got a battery right here. Basically, it's a little battery like you put in deer feeders. That's how I got the replacement battery. Here's my monitor. Here's the probe with lights, camera, and action on it. Again, this is a natural cavity that the birds built. Some of the others, that other direction, are natural, and a lot of them are the artificial cavities. You can see the staff and everything on this tree. Then our last tree, the last tree, I guess this is 3rd year.
Oh, you are so right. Look at it, just kind of sneaking around.
Oh, there they are.
There they are. There they are.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, listen to them. They're so upset about this. Yep, yep. Look at them. Look at that. Yes, they are fussing.
When you can barely hear them, things are tiny, tiny, which I was expecting. I was hoping one right. I got 5 feet. You're kidding about the exaggerated.
Look at them up there. Look at them flying around. It looks like a giraffe's neck way up there like that, right? Okay, come on back.
Okay, I'm gonna move it closer to the tree and 2 of them right there.
Oh, yeah.
Listen to them fussing. They're up on this tree.
They're freaking.
They would be so excited. Oh.
Yes.
So close. Oh my God. So close. And there we go. There we go. You got it. You got it. I can't wait to see what's in there. Awesome. Oh, I think the little one's fledged.
Oh.
Oh, oh, it's not Cockaded.
It's been what?
Snakes, something else, raccoons. Oh, that is very sad. No wonder the parents are fussing. They're like, they're back.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's another one of those predators.
They're traumatized, right? Oh my God. Aww. Go ahead, go ahead. I'm filming. There you go. There's Ismail. Snake.
There's no sign. So if there's no sign of anything, that means snakes don't. Everybody wants to decide, but there were previous. Yeah. They were here last year.
Did you see them, Bobby? They were fussing, fussing, fussing. Yeah, I'm recording. You want to record while I look? Where are they?
They were.
Hear 'em.
Well, there were 2 over there. Right where these broken.
I'm like a bird baby.
Yeah. Oh, let me see. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Cool. Thank you.
Almost.
Yeah. Cool.
But, I mean, like the next one. Well, so sorry, man. I thought y'all were gonna get to see some little ones. Oh, you got the 2 big dogs. Yeah. They're still fussing. Yeah. They're still fussing. Get out of here.
You're out.
They're so tiny.
You want me to roll it?
Yeah, not real fast.
Yeah. It was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes everywhere. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my daughter the binoculars in her backpack, so I didn't even think about it.
I hear them. Yeah, they're fussing. So at least they're still thinking, hey, we need to do something. Yeah.
There's one.
Oh,
Straight up. Straight up.
Oh, he's right there, almost at the hole.
So normally this time of year they wouldn't be, I mean, other times of the year they wouldn't be here, but during breeding and nesting season, they hang out in this area. So this tells me where they're still interested in me.
He's right in the hole, yeah.
Now, if I was average person walking around here, is this considered harassment to stay under here? Because you'll have
If we
the
did it
trail
for a long,
closed.
yeah,
Right.
we close it off for that, just so even just people just passing through may disturb them going back and forth and feeding or laying eggs. So we're just hyper vigilant that way.
Because I think when I took the class, I think John Warner had mentioned that there was theoretically a
Yeah.
law that says you can't,
Yeah.
hang
And-
around too long and make too much noise.
Yeah, and even if they are here, I like to say no more than 15 minutes. That may have just been like very recently.
He's saying exactly, where's my egg?
I know. Oh, there's three? Y'all seen three together?
Yeah.
That's good information for me to have
Right
too. Yeah. That's good information.
Right here.
Wow.
Oh, gosh, it's incredible.
The birds on this forest are a little more used to people than they are in the Fairchild where they don't get any visitors, but out here they're a little more tolerant.
Like you said, people kill themselves to see these, and we're seeing three on our very first outing.
There's one on this tree to the left of the tree. Good chance to either see or get photos of band colors for me. Oh, and there's will be some that don't have it. Okay, so none.
Look, here comes another. Look, two more. Oh. Dang. That was amazing, man. Oops. I've never seen the velvet panther. It's actually there's some right here. Yeah, I've never seen all this. Let me see. Here, what is it? So I can show the people online.
It's like velvet. Do you feel it?
Yeah,
super
but
soft?
what, panic is the second word?
Yeah, P-A-N-N.
Don't get it. Don't get me the line.
P-A-N-N-I-C. So maybe
Oh, so
It's
that's not, yeah,
It's
yeah.
Look,
the-
like-
I think
Not panic.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, you got to set it around. Well, a typical happening in nature. There were no eggs. It was obviously predated. I was here Tuesday with some students that are doing an RCW project. It still had 3 eggs. The week before it had 3 eggs. So I figured now it's about time for them to hatch. I figured y'all see little ones. Oh, nothing. So was it totally empty and not broken eggs in there and not a big mess in there? Totally empty. That means
rat snake got in there, because they'll take it in and swallow it, no evidence except for his fat belly, so. So there is time, they're still interested in the area, that may have happened like really recently, because they were still out here interested in us, looking in the cavity and all that, so there's still time for them to re-nest, but it's getting a little late in the season, and even if they do, it's so hot they may not hatch, but I'll try to keep y'all posted, hopefully. And elsewhere on the forest, I haven't seen eggs yet. I'm not going to take the time to do it today. I'll be back Monday or Tuesday because they didn't have eggs Tuesday. I said, well, it doesn't matter if I miss Saturday. But yeah, I'll let you know if there's eggs other places or whatever.
So Donna, the reason there were 3 is that there's a young one from the last year.
Yeah,
that
yeah. So
helps
if there's
with this
3,
one.
that helps keep the family going and helps finding food and defending territory and helping with the young. So the 3 of them had a breeding male and female. One of the birds people could see didn't have a band on it. It's been perfect because the bird was on the tree right above us, but they said I don't see bands on it. So there are going to be some birds out here that don't have bands on it. I didn't get to them in time or something like that, and because I'm not here full time. But and I have a small window when I can band. So there are some out here with no bands, but if you ever get pictures or see some with bands, that's where I need the colors. Yeah. How long do they live? I've heard 8 or 9 years, maybe. That they've tried to raise these woodpeckers in captivity many years ago, and I don't think it lasted. It didn't work well, like some species it does. At least it doesn't work well. But I've heard 8 or 9 years, and to me that's a long time in nature out here. But,
So will the helper bird come back every year for 8 or 9 years?
no, they live together. They're here 24/7, 365. They don't migrate at all, so they're all staying together as a family group.
And they will wait that long to start breeding themselves if they're.
Well, I guess I don't know. Okay. That's their business. I don't know.
Yes. I wonder if the rat snake population is higher and concentrated in this area because of the way you have.
I don't know. You have to find out.
Monitoring that. And can you do anything like a snake guard, like a squirrel guard?
You can put, well, in the old days, and we used to have some out here, aluminum flashing about this big, we put that around the tree. And it's still acceptable to do that, but Fish and Wildlife Service want us to not do that anymore because if a baby bird did fall out of the tree, he can't pitch his way back up that way. So I'd like for us to kind of scrape the bark and make it a little less easy for the snakes to get up. We can't put down the tanglefoot or whatever those little nets that we can't put that down because of endangered
What is the
species.
predator of the rat snake?
Probably hawks.
Birds of
Hawks
prey.
and owls. Birds of prey, yeah. And I don't know if the population here is big or not. It may be. I mean, this is a nice habitat for them. And there's other things. Bluebird moths.
All birds, not just
Yes.
Cockaded woodpeckers.
Yeah,
So-
But then they'll also eat woodpeckers. Yeah. The hawks, the raptors will eat our woodpeckers too.
Oh, that big.
Yeah, even the sparrow, the kestrels. Yeah, we'll see. Because I've seen some come in and said, "Oh, I've got a woodpecker here. I've seen it come in. Oh no, but the woodpecker got in the tree first. But they will also get them as well. So if there's a higher concentration here, I don't know. But there's plenty of other stuff for them to get. And other kind like the dead trees. If you're in a place that has what we call dead snags, dead trees that has holes in it, if it's not a danger to people, leave it up because it's good habitat for the squirrels. Give them somewhere else to go. Squirrels and tufted titmice and wood ducks. I've seen wood ducks in an old and large woodpecker tree.
There was one outside my house this morning.
Oh, really?
Yes, actually, it was 2 of them. They were. Didn't recognize the call, and I looked up, and there was it was the whistling, the black-bellied
black-bellied whistling duck. Oh yeah, cool. I've seen them in this area. What I didn't mention inside with my presentation, so I just to hurry up and get out here, was every 5 years, and you know the brown-headed nuthatches, they're everywhere here. So some people say I never see them, but they're everywhere. Every 5 years, Fish and Wildlife Service takes a group of listed threatened and endangered species and does a review on them. And it's going to be dozens and dozens, many of them every 5 years. And it could be mollusks, it could be plants, it could be mammals, it could be birds, reptiles, whatever. They do a review on it. They look at the populations and the population growth or decline. If there's land managers that are managing for those species, then they'll get with them. And the idea is to see if the species is holding its own, if it's still declining, if it's really coming back strong, recovering or whatever, and then they make a determination. The determinations can be either leave it like it is, like if it's listed as threatened, just leave it like it is, nothing changes. It can be downlisted, like if it's endangered, it can be downlisted to threatened.
It can be delisted, which just means totally off the list, like they did the bald eagles, although they're still protected with the Bald Eagle Act and all that. And this past go round, RCW was part of that. Well, they came out with a proposal, it's been several months ago, that the Fish and Wildlife Service is proposing they be downlisted to threatened. They feel like the population numbers have come back enough. The land managers like us have said, we're going to manage our forest the same way anyway, whether it's downlisted or say the same as endangered. So it's proposed as being downlisted. It's in the period where on the Federal Register, you can comments and things like that. I haven't heard the final determination yet, which it should have probably already been, but it may be, I think it may be closer in the fall. But the final determination, I don't know yet. But even if it's downlisted to threatened, we're still going to manage the same way we have been for them. They are still protected, just different ways. And there's a little more things you can do with a threatened species, especially in forestry, that you can do with, except for them, unless they're endangered. But it's still protected, and just don't know the outcome of that. So we're still calling it endangered because there hasn't been a final word on that. They don't know if they're going to go through as a proposal, or if somebody comes up with something, well, so we got to leave it where it is.
So this state forest is going to develop pressure.
It is, yeah.
Is this significant to the
It's not really. Yes, there have been efforts in the past made to try to sell it, to develop it, or whatever.
Really?
Yeah. And Connor may know the latest. There was a bill put out by a local.
In 2017, Crichton wrote some legislation to the A&M system, not us, not TFS, but we're a member of the A&M system. Was interested in a satellite campus on 242, similar to what Sam Houston has at Lone Star or something like that. A&M was interested in the satellite campus. They own property right there next to us. They were interested in some sort of development on the south end of the forest. Due to public outcry and public outreach, there was an organization called Save the Jones State Forest that came together.
It was on a ballot. It was
Yes.
voted on.
Yeah, it was voted on.
I said no.
And so the legislation ended up actually making a complete 180, and it's written that the Jones State Forest should be protected from any source of development for perpetuity. The only exception was granted to TxDOT for.
So do you guys have a conservation easement on this land?
No.
Because they are going to expand. I've heard 1488.
Yep, they've done that once back in what 2002 or something. They were going to expand 1488 to where it is now, and because of the high traffic load now, and so we spent actually 10 years. We spent, well, what should we do? What can we do here? Blah blah blah. Finally, the right person came on and said, okay, well, they can mitigate for what they're going to take. And since there's an existing road here, they can. If they're putting in a new road, that's a different story from what I understand. But if it's an existing road, they can do that, but they have to mitigate for what they take. So the almost 12 acres that was going to be impacted by this, they had to mitigate for that because they're permanently taking out woodpecker habitat. Although we know close to the road, it was dense and thick, and the woodpeckers weren't using it. I didn't say that. But still, it's potential mature trees. You know,
Yeah.
Woodpecker worthy. But they had to mitigate for that, and about 350 or 375 acres, they paid for the mulching that we needed horribly on some of our places here. So it paid for us to improve habitat for them to take that 12 acres, that little bit on either side of 1488. So whatever they do on this forest, expanding roads or whatever, and I know there's some coming in the future, they're gonna have to mitigate for that. And they have to know where all the active woodpecker clusters are. We have to make sure there's enough habitat designated for them around here and that sort of thing. So it takes a while to get that done. But I think it'll go quicker this time, because last time the Fish and Wildlife Service, the local guys, we weren't sure what we had to do, and we were looking at it, and then all of a sudden, this is all you have to do, and we did it. So we got 350 acres plus taken care of habitat work that we badly needed to give up 12 acres of yeah.
These roses, do they have to follow anything special because it's in like an endangered species area?
No, since we have enough habitat on our property, they don't have to set aside property for that. Now, of course, they can't come out here. They can't shoot the birds. They can't, if they go over to their house, they can't shoot the birds or cut down the trees or anything like that. They can't do that. But right now, they have to do things special.
Their home costs are a lot higher.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, these developers sell this to these folks, right? This is their private forest oasis they have access to. You can imagine how much higher you pay for a home right here as opposed to deeper in the neighborhood.
But I heard you'll get calls sometimes that your wildlife's on there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get calls like our hogs are tearing up their yard. Like there's a big man and brand on the side of it. That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, my hugs are your hugs.
Yeah.
If it wasn't dangerous, if it wasn't built yet, would they still be able to build there? Even though
They
it wasn't
did,
dangerous?
they did.
They did.
Yeah, they had to know wherever, because that didn't used to be there. When I first started working there, there was some on, there's some that way. On that side, yeah. But they had to know where, they had to get a biological assessment, they had to know where each of the active trees were. I gave them a map where our cavity trees were, and as long as they were 200 feet away from the cavity trees.
The good thing there's a line right there. So, I mean, you know, the woodpeckers wouldn't have got over there.
I caught one guy doing
And maybe it is mentioned, but I don't know if it's been measured. I know at one point somebody was out here measuring noise pollution, and sometimes that's brought up, but I don't know if they actually measured that before all of this stuff. But one group at one time had some air quality stuff up here, but the noise pollution, I don't know. I've seen some papers written on it, but I don't think that's considered in it.
What about light pollution? Do you have light pollution? Does that affect the?
It may, but I don't think so. Not like it does.
Migratory
Birds flying and bats and stuff. Yeah.
Is controlling or managing invasives part of the program? For maintaining.
That would be not maintaining necessarily their habitat, but just for the health of the forest anyway. And we do what we can do. I mean,
it's tough around here because of the neighborhoods. That restricts me from burning. Right?
Right.
It also significantly restricts my ability to spray herbicide. I've got to do it on a very still day, and then I've also got to close down trails. Right, I can't expose the public to those.
He's got a different situation here in this urban forest, where other places we can do a little more, and a little more leniency, but right here with all this around and I-45 and the airport, his hands are tighter on what we can do.
How's the bat population?
I hope it's pretty good. Pretty good. I'm not getting about my mosquitoes, but I don't monitor much else because I just don't have the time, and I'm not full time up here, full time biologist.
Species, yeah.
But or yeah, if you're talking about the long-eared bats or something like that, I don't know if they're here or not. But we've got types of habitat that they could use. So. Did you have something, Bobby? Did you have a question too?
No, I was just
Really? So,
Finding-
yeah, so it's a unique
finding the
situation here,
questioner.
but they're thriving here. Other places, parts of the world, they're on golf courses. You know how nice and open golf courses are. So they're out in golf courses. There used to be some on golf course up in Rayburn country, but they moved. Those birds decided that was enough, and they moved off to adjoining forest. But
Donna, this forest is 1,700 acres. How many RCW do we have?
we have 4 family groups here right now. In the past, we've had a little more. But it's kind of busting at the seams as it is now to have the proper habitat. A lot of it is mature pine like this. Some areas we have like up front, you see that little pine plantation that's younger and more dense, and they're not going to use that. But when we do the thinning, like on the very far south side, we thinned that. So it's getting into primo woodpecker habitat eventually. So it's not all suitable woodpecker habitat, but it's kind of.
So how many birds is in 4 family groups?
It's kind of like the average American family, 2.6, but I would say probably there's 10 or 12 here at one time. Not every family that I have here, they don't always have local birds, but pre-breeding season, little ones usually have 9 to 12, probably more like 10.
In total.
Yes, total birds. Yeah.
So in this area, is this just one family group?
This
here?
is one family group
Okay.
right here. There's another family group way down there, and then we have 2 more on the other side.
So they have a pretty big territory then.
Right. For making sure they have enough habitat, there's the recovery plan, which is a big plan written by Fish and Wildlife Service for threatened endangered species. How are we going to recover the species? How are we going to bring them back? And there's different qualifications, like private landowners. They say, well, make sure you have 75 acres of suitable habitat. We're kind of following those guidelines. But if you don't, by suitable habitat, you have to have a certain density of pine trees 10 inches and above in diameter. And if you don't have enough here, if it's kind of sparse, you have to go to more acres to capture the total, what we call basal area or whatever. Yes, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service uses 120 acres minimum. But again, if they say for a family, for a group to sustain, it needs at least 75 good acres of habitat. Most of ours we've set aside. And of course they fly where they want to, but as far as what we have and manage, most of ours are like 85 or 100 plus acres that we've
that we manage for each group. Then we have some open areas that the birds aren't living at that have potential if more birds happen to find their way over here, but the travel corridors from here and other forests are slowly going the way of shopping malls and housing additions. Yeah.
What do y'all do with the birds during prescribed burns? Do y'all?
They're fine. They take care of themselves. That's one thing we can do during nesting season. During nesting season, we can't come thin through here. We can't mow through here or whatever, but you can prescribe burning, just protect the trees, break away the fuel from the trees, because if it gets close to the trees and that sap, it'll torch it. And sometimes you can still do that in the trees. Okay.
So they come back, they don't?
But yeah, they just fly wherever they want to go. And that's, even if there's little ones in the tree, you can still do the prescribed burn. Because that's slow and controlled. It's not big blazing and out of control. Right. So you can, they're fine. It's like, just like most of the critters on the forest, they can fly their way until it's done and come back.
Do these birds fly like long distances? Like if you were to have some kind of green corridor between one area and another, would that work?
That would help, yeah, because one bird on the Fairchild State Forest, we had never banded until when I started here. A bunch of biologists got together, we banded all the birds here and down there. In the Fairchild State Forest, we found a bird that was banded. And well, the guy before me never did band. We found out it came from the Angelina National Forest. And I don't know exactly from where, but as the crow flies, or woodpecker flies, that was 70 miles. So that's kind of long for them, but it's not uncommon for them to go 20, 30, 40 miles from a place. But that one was 70 miles at least. So,
so that could be like,
that's what we need is travel corridors between the forests that have populations. We still have gotten Sam Houston bird on this forest before, and Sam Houston has gotten one of our birds before. And there's a private population that's not too far from here. I haven't measured the distance yet, but over in Montgomery, but they've got woodpeckers there, and I don't know if we've had an influx there, but still just the travel corridor between here and there, it's still not as, it's a little better than going here to the sand, but still.
So
the bulk of the numbers in Texas are the Sam Houston National Forest, and all 4 of our national forests have them. I don't know. I don't usually see. I see the numbers for Texas. So as far as family groups, we probably have 900 to 1,000, I think. But overall, countrywide, I don't have those numbers. But I've heard somebody say 5,000 to 8,000 family groups. But the national forests have most of them here, and it's probably the same other places as well. But then there's some state lands and private lands.
how much taller will this have to get before you say we need to mow it down again?
The mid-story to be no higher than 7 feet. So
okay.
If we can burn it, if there's small burnings here and we get to do that once in a while here, that'll probably keep this down. But we try
stay under 7 feet.
The guidelines, it's just the number of the guidelines throughout. Is Sam Houston Forest managed like this is? Now they've got what, 600,000, they got hundreds of thousands of acres, and not all of it. I mean, it was hard enough for us, small agency and not big budget, to keep this like this here. And so they also have budget and personnel constraints. So not everything out there is like this, but they do the same things. They will mulch, they will burn. They mostly burn.
Large scale burn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our departments of burning are 30 acres a year.
Most of their burn is geared towards the woodpeckers, and the woodpeckers aren't all of the forest, but it's on a lot of it. So many they're going to burn. They might herbicide some, I don't know, but I know they mulch and they do a lot of burning. People like this, so they do the same thing here. And sometimes it's not practical to get the whole foraging area like we've got here, the whole 100 acres or whatever. And so that's why when I have the scouts, I concentrate around the trees, but still they need more than that. They need the whole foraging area. Nice little thing. And they don't come to your bird feeders, so I found one of my bird feeders. Well, good. Well, and Connor knows how to get hold of me, so if you have any questions, or Carolyn or somebody will know how to get hold of me. This is a great new group. Wow.